Chapter 402. The immortal king smiled faintly as if he could see the astonishment of these masters. Although he didn't deliberately change it, the majestic and domineering aura that came from the depths of his soul was completely reflected at this moment. Indeed, I also possess a type of supreme power, and that is my strongest power, supreme immortal power, silence. Everyone who heard this fell into an endless silence. They looked at the peerless man in the sky and saw that the other end of his arm had finally completely turned into a true white spirit origin crystal. Finally, they were completely speechless. The astonishment at this moment surpassed anything else. Previously, they thought that this man had the 5 most terrifying supreme powers in this era. However, only now did they realize that his limit was far from that. He actually possessed a 6th type of supreme power. Furthermore, this supreme power was something that had long since disappeared, supreme immortal power. Everyone looked at the immortal king. At this moment, they felt that this man was really like the supreme of the immortal devil era, who had walked out of the long river of history and returned from the primitive era. He was really the unparalleled immortal king of this era, the unparalleled immortal king of history. It's your turn. The immortal king didn't care about everyone's astonishment at all. He, who had so many secrets, didn't care about what these people thought of him. He had given up so much to finally persevere until now. The so-called glory, the so-called prosperity, the so-called reputation, in his eyes, were already dispensable. Just as he said to Lu Feng, he had given up everything to come here. He had come here for the supreme peak. Apart from that goal, there was nothing else that could make him care about. Hearing the immortal king's words, Lu Feng nodded gently. However, his eyes were still filled with boundless shock. Perhaps in the eyes of others, Lu Feng was shocked by the scene that had appeared before. However, no one would understand that Lu Feng's shock was because of himself. He was because of the same power that he had. So, the strange power in my body is immortal power. This strange power was incomparably terrifying. It could raise his battle prowess to the highest level. Even the great devil power, bloodline power, and the monarch power he had condensed couldn't compare to it. In the beginning, Lu Feng had thought about what kind of power it was. He had thought about many things, but he had never thought that this kind of power was actually the power of an immortal. He took a deep breath and tried to dispel the shock in his eyes. Lu Feng walked slowly and finally arrived in front of the spirit origin crystal. This time, he was once again the center of attention. Although the immortal king kept saying that he treated Lu Feng as an enemy, when the immortal king revealed that he had 6 supreme powers in a row, and even the power of immortals, everyone no longer thought highly of Lu Feng. After all, this immortal king was the true champion of the Battle of the Kings. Even Emperor Lu Feng couldn't compare to the number 1 in the War of Kings. Lu Feng never cared about the attitudes and opinions of these people. Finally, he walked in front of the spirit origin crystal. Just like the immortal king before, Lu Feng also gently placed his hand on top of the spirit origin crystal. At this moment, Lu Feng began to output his spirit origin crystal. The speed at which the color changed was no different from the immortal king. In just a few moments, Lu Feng also surpassed the threshold of light red from before. Seeing this scene, Yuan Ling's expression became incomparably unsightly. His disciple stopped at light blue, but Lu Feng had already reached light red. Although the immortal king had also done it, the immortal king was in existence with immortal power. It was only natural that he could do it. Moreover, the immortal king didn't seem to be from the human race. That was enough for him. However, Lu Feng was different. He was a monstrous genius of the human race. If possible, Yuan Ling was willing to be a monstrous genius of a first-rate race, but he wasn't willing to be suppressed by the human race. However, it was impossible for his wish to come true. Because in the next moment, the spirit origin crystal changed again. It changed endlessly. The process of change was so similar to the immortal king from before. Even the speed was the same. Finally, when the final moment arrived, Lu Feng also stopped at the threshold of the milky white color. Seeing this scene, countless existences sucked in a deep breath of cold air. If Lu Feng really made a breakthrough and caused the spirit origin crystal to become truly white, wouldn't that mean that Lu Feng also comprehended immortal power, this kind of invincible supreme power? This was truly frightening. After a long time, Lu Feng still didn't make a breakthrough. The color was still milky white. Seeing this, many existences breathed a sigh of relief. They already knew that it was impossible for Lu Feng to make a breakthrough. A trace of relief flashed through Yuanling's eyes. Although Lu Feng's performance up until now was already monstrous enough to make people palpitate with fear. But as long as he didn't become immortal power, everything was fine. Everything was fine. Unfortunately, Lu Feng doesn't have immortal power. Su Ling let out a long sigh. He looked at Wangui, who also had a disappointed expression. A trace of helplessness flashed through his eyes. If Lu Feng could really make the spirit origin crystal become milky white, it would really be great news for the human race. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Everything wasn't. Everyone felt that it was a pity. The appearance of immortal power was already shocking enough, but how they hoped that another existence with immortal power would appear. They hoped to see the scene of two immortals living side by side in the world. Unfortunately, it was all a fantasy. Slowly, the immortal king walked over and arrived in front of Lu Feng. Lu Feng didn't look at him. He just looked ahead quietly. In many people's eyes, this scene seemed to be a temporary decadence because Lu Feng couldn't bear the failure. But in the next moment, the immortal king's words let everyone know that everything wasn't like that. Why do you have to stop? I know that it's far from your end. I can't feel anything else, but I can feel the power in your body. Why do you have to give up? Why do you have to stop? Lu Feng was speechless. When everyone heard this, they looked at Lu Feng with a strange and shocked expression. From the words just now, they had completely understood. Could it be? Could it be, this terrifying monster of the human race actually also comprehended immortal power? The meaning of the immortal king's words was already very clear. Lu Feng also had immortal power. It was just that he stopped at the last moment and didn't let the spirit origin crystal change any further. Everyone looked at Lu Feng at this moment. They didn't doubt the immortal king's words because they had all existed in the foreign battlefield for a long time. They were already well aware of the many rumors that had been circulating around the world. These people naturally understood that there was a special kind of connection between peerless monsters. This kind of connection was like a predestined duel. It was unavoidable and couldn't be hidden no matter what. There was an inexplicable connection between monsters of the same realm. This feeling was even more intense for the apex geniuses of the extreme grade. Lu Feng stood quietly on the spot, but didn't say anything. He did stop at the last moment, but he didn't tell her the reason. Looking at the incomparably silent Lu Feng, the immortal king's eyes flashed with an incomprehensible light. He gently walked to Lu Feng's side. You are a supreme monarch, a supreme existence among all monarchs. In countless eras, there are only two people like you who are destined to become the supreme existence of an era, and you are the second. Could it be that you still have some concerns? Are you still afraid of something? I remember your title. Your title is to become the supreme existence of everything and make people submit. But now you're retreating? Is this okay? Is this okay? What makes you think you're qualified to receive that title? If that's really the case, then this time, it's my mistake to come here. I came here because of you, because you are the Emperor's greatness, the Emperor's peerlessness. I've treated you as my fated opponent for the rest of my life. But you've disappointed me. If that's really all you are, then I came here for nothing. Lu Feng gently exhaled. There was an incomparably complicated emotion in his eyes. Yes, what do I have to worry about? I once said that in order to reach the supreme peak, I will become the enemy of all. But now, at such a moment, I actually retreated. There was a kind of mockery in his eyes. However, the one Lu Feng was mocking was himself. He was the Emperor, the supreme existence of all domains. As long as he participated, there would be no failure. Regardless of whether it was related or not, as long as it existed, he would succeed. This was because he was the Emperor. He was the supreme existence, the invincible galaxy era. Lu Feng didn't say anything else. He just raised his arm once more. Upon seeing this, the immortal king still had a strange expression on his face. At this moment, all his eyes were focused on the milky white spirit origin crystal in front of Lu Feng. Finally, Lu Feng's mind power was injected again. At this moment, it was even more eye-catching. It was another moment that made everyone hold their breath. Between heaven and earth, there was only silence. There wasn't even the slightest sound of trembling. What existed was truly incomparable silence. It was so quiet that no one could hear a single sound. The milky white color slowly receded. In the next moment, a pure white color slowly appeared. The medicine god square. At this moment, on this square that contained nearly 200 million martial artists and psychic masters, a sound appeared. This was the only sound. Other than this sound, there was actually no other sound. This sound was a kind of cold sound. If it was only one existence that sucked in a breath, then it wouldn't be a problem. However, when 10 people, 100 people, and more than 100 million people in this square gasped at the same time, that kind of sound made people tremble. After a long time, finally, a voice slowly rang out. He actually really has immortal power. He really has immortal power. This was the only thought in everyone's mind at this moment. The milky white color had already proved everything. This was the supreme power that had never appeared after the end of the immortal devil era. It was the strongest power that stood at the peak of the supreme power in legends. This was the exclusive power of immortals, the supreme immortal power. Chapter 403. Everyone looked at Lu Feng strangely. At this moment, they began to search continuously. These people wanted to know who Lu Feng was and what kind of background he had. Although Lu Feng had not shown any other horror. However, just the celestial force alone was enough to shock everything. Because this was a supreme power that was comparable to anything else. Supreme King, peak 7th level King Path Domain. The definition of a monstrous genius was to comprehend 2 supreme powers. However, there were exceptions. If what he comprehended was a legendary supreme power like the immortal power, which was the pinnacle of supreme power, then just this one was enough to become a supreme king, to become a monstrous genius of the era. It doesn't matter if Fu Tu has comprehended other supreme powers. Just by relying on the immortal energy, which is the pinnacle of the legendary supreme power, he is enough to become a true monstrous genius of this era. Killer King Lu Tao, Heavenly King Wang Qingyun, Emperor Lu Feng, the immortal king in front of us, and this mysterious alchemist Futu of the human race, we've gathered the 5 supreme emperors. The minimum requirement for a king battle has been gathered. To be able to produce a monstrous genius who could shatter the king path domain and enter the emperor path domain, it had to be a king battle. And one of the prerequisites for this king battle was to have 5 supreme kings. Only then could it be considered a true king battle. Only then could it produce a monstrous genius of the emperor path who could dominate everything. A true supreme youth. And now everything had been gathered. Up until now there were 5 supreme monarchs. It could be said that the king battle was really almost complete. The human race has schemed for countless eras. They have been silent for 500 years. For 500 years, the human race has not made any moves for 500 years. In these 500 years, not even a single supreme has appeared. Just like this, in the eyes of many races, the human race has fallen. But who would have thought that the human race's scheme was actually such a terrifying move? Did the human race plan for today, 500 years later? All the beings were in awe, and shock flashed across their eyes. At this moment, these people finally realized something. That was the terror of this era of the human race. The 5 supreme kings, the human race's king of slaughter Lu Tao, the human race's emperor Lu Feng, and now, this Futu who comprehended immortal force has appeared. 3 of the 5 supreme monarchs actually belong to the human race. How crazy will the humankind be in this era? Is this the terror of the human race? A race that had only developed for 10,000 years had first produced the first divine king, an overlord of an epoch, and then a supreme and mighty human king who was comparable to the immortal and devil era. But now they actually gave birth to 3 supreme kings who are bound to be god kings. Is the human race going to return to the peak in this era? Millions upon millions of people were silent. At this moment, millions upon millions of people were silent. No one could describe the fear, trembling, and boundless silence in their hearts at this moment. At this moment, the terror of the human race was deeply ingrained in their hearts. No, look at that spirit origin crystal. While everyone was silent, countless pairs of eyes gathered once again. Following the guidance of this voice, they once again focused on the house-sized priceless mind origin crystal in the sky. What is going on? Their eyes were slightly sluggish, filled with countless doubts and puzzlement. Even the 11 alchemy grandmasters had the same look in their eyes at this moment. This was because they were completely unable to understand the reason for the change in the spirit origin crystal in front of them. No one knew when it started, but the white color on the spirit origin crystal had completely disappeared. However, it didn't turn back to its original black color. Instead, it gradually became transparent. Looking at the transparent spirit origin crystal, there were only 2 people who could remain unchanged at this moment. They were Lu Feng and the immortal king. Lu Feng seemed to have realized this long ago. He slowly retracted his arm and stood quietly on the spot. There wasn't the slightest change in his expression. Suddenly, the immortal king looked at Lu Feng and smiled. Did you already know about this situation? The immortal king's voice drifted over. However, at this moment in this quiet world, it was so obvious. Lu Feng didn't say anything. He still stood on the spot. He looked at the spirit origin crystal in front of him that was slowly returning to its original black color from its transparent color. His eyes were incomparably calm. The immortal king's words didn't cause any change in Lu Feng's expression. The reason for that was because that was the truth. Indeed, Lu Feng had already known about it before this. Perhaps he couldn't guess what would happen, but he was sure of one thing. That was, the existence of his strange power was an existence that was even higher than immortal energy. This was an inexplicable feeling. When the spirit origin crystal was in its milky white color, Lu Feng felt it. He felt that this milky white color, or even white, was not a color that he should have. Once this continued, then everything would change. Immortal energy was already recognized as the strongest supreme power. However, his own power was an existence that surpassed immortal energy. Then, was it possible for it to exist? Therefore, at that moment, Lu Feng really hesitated. However, he understood in a very short period of time. He completely understood. He was Emperor Lu Feng. In the past, he had made a great wish to defeat all the enemies in the world and let himself ascend to the supreme peak. But now, because of the fear of the unknown, he completely gave up. Was this him, Lu Feng? Was it him, Emperor Lu Feng? Therefore, he let go of all his worries. What is this? Lu Feng looked at the spirit origin crystal that had finally returned to its original black color and said slowly. He knew that the unparalleled man knew about this power. From the beginning, when he asked him to continue, Lu Feng knew. The immortal king was silent for a moment. After a while, he finally said slowly, This is immortal energy. Lu Feng turned around and looked at the immortal king, only to find that he was looking at him indifferently. And in those eyes there was the most scorching fighting spirit. In the next moment, the immortal king gently waved his arm and took out a crystal-like thing from an independent space. Then, he gently crushed it. Feeling this strange power of confinement, Lu Feng's eyes lit up slightly. Time and space crystal? The immortal king nodded gently. Lu Feng was silent for a moment. The time and space crystal was a strange crystal formed from the endless space-time storm. This kind of crystal had a terrifying effect, but Lu Feng didn't know much about it, because the time and space crystal belonged to the category of 8th grade divine objects. Of course, among the uses of the time and space crystal that Lu Feng knew, there was one, and that was that the time and space crystal had the effect of isolating spacetime. This crystal had the same effect as the metal object that Lu Tao gave to Lu Feng. However, the time and space crystal's effect was a little greater. Moreover, the time and space crystal was a one-time use item. The immortal king wasted such a valuable time and space crystal just so that no one would know what he was talking to him. Lu Feng knew that what he was about to tell him was definitely the real secret. Looking at Lu Feng, the immortal king sighed softly and slowly said, "The power you possess is indeed immortal power. However, it is not ordinary immortal power." Lu Feng didn't say anything. He just watched quietly and waited for the immortal king's explanation. Immortal power is also divided into different types. There is the chaos immortal power that focuses on slaughter and destruction, the law immortal power that controls everything, and the creation immortal power that shapes all life. The three great immortal powers are the strongest and only three kinds of immortal power. However, above these three kinds of immortal power, there is another kind of power. It is not immortal power, but it is called immortal power, because it is the one that gave birth to immortal power. The primordial power is also called the primordial immortal power. At this moment, Lu Feng's body shook slightly. Suddenly, he understood something. I see. Lu Feng finally understood why it was called the primordial scripture. In Lu Feng's opinion, although the primordial scripture and the great devil true body were obtained at the same time, they were both extremely powerful and comparable to the human king's scripture. However, in comparison, the primordial sutra was incomparable to the great devil true body. After all, the great devil true body had brought Lu Feng a terrifying increase in strength. It had brought him various realms of the great devil body, great devil power, and heaven-defying technique. These were all things that the primordial sutra couldn't compare to. Although the primordial sutra had various immortal techniques, they were still far inferior to the great devil true body. But now Lu Feng finally understood. It turned out that the primordial sutra was not inferior to the great devil true body at all. The primordial power is that the primordial immortal power, Lu Feng muttered softly. The three great immortal powers were the chaos immortal power, the law immortal power, and the creation immortal power. But this primordial immortal power had given birth to the existence of these three great immortal powers. It could be said that just one type of primordial immortal power was enough to surpass all other powers. With this type of power, the primordial sutra was the greatest cultivation technique in the world. So it's not that it's too weak. It's that I'm too weak. There was no problem with the primordial sutra. The problem was Lu Feng himself. He could only blame himself for being too weak. He didn't understand the true meaning of the primordial sutra at all. Looking at the silent Lu Feng, the immortal king slowly opened his mouth. His tone was unusually deep. I used 6 types of supreme immortal powers. But if we really have to compare, I'd rather use these 6 types of supreme immortal powers in exchange for this primordial power. He gently stretched out his arm. At this moment, the immortal power belonging to the immortal king appeared. When he faced Yu Hua Qingyuan, he didn't use this immortal power at all. So no one knew that he still had immortal power. Feeling the destructive power from the immortal power in the immortal king's hand, Lu Feng gently nodded his head. This is the chaos immortal power you were talking about. The immortal king gently nodded his head. My chaos immortal power is the strongest of the supreme immortal powers that I control. Just the chaos immortal power alone is equivalent to 2 supreme immortal powers. As for the fixed order immortal power and the creation immortal power, although they can't compare to the chaos immortal power, once these 2 immortal powers are mastered, they're far from ordinary peak supreme immortal powers. But you only have 1 type of primordial immortal power, but it's equivalent to 3 supreme immortal powers. Lu Feng was slightly dazed. A strange light flashed in his eyes. 1 type of primordial immortal power was equivalent to 3 supreme immortal powers. This was too terrifying, too extreme. No wonder the immortal king said that he was willing to use all his immortal power in exchange for 1 type of immortal power from Lu Feng. The primordial immortal power did have the right to do so. I've already heard the rumors. The current you hasn't fully comprehended the primordial immortal power. Otherwise, you wouldn't have ended up like that in that battle. Lu Feng didn't refute this. Indeed, if the immortal king was right, then the previous battle really shouldn't have ended up like this. Previously, he'd only known and used the primordial immortal power as a peak supreme immortal power. It was a supreme power comparable to the power of bloodline, the power of demons, the power of monarchs, and the power of the heavenly Tao Crown Prince's power of the Yellow Springs. Perhaps it was stronger than the power of No Rhombus, but only by a little. Compared to the so-called economy that was comparable to the 3 supreme powers, it was far, far too far away. Now that he heard the immortal king's words, Lu Feng finally understood. It turned out that he hadn't fully utilized the primordial immortal power. Chapter 404. I understand now. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. Looking at this scene, the immortal king nodded gently. You must be even stronger now. Right now, you're far too far away from our realm. You don't have the ability to fight me at all if we are at the same level. Lu Feng didn't deny it. It wasn't just because of his intuition. It was also because the previous battle had proven everything. If he was at the peak of his cultivation, he could indeed raise his strength to the 3rd level of the demigod realm. This was the same as the immortal king. Moreover, he was confident that he could defeat Yu Hua Qingyuan if he went berserk. However, he was absolutely unable to do it like the celestial king. He was as calm as the wind and clouds, without even the slightest trace of anger. This was the difference between them. One was going all out, while the other was incomparably indifferent. There was no need to say anything more. However, Lu Feng wasn't depressed at all. Just as the immortal king had said, Lu Feng's immortal power was the primitive immortal power. It was the most terrifying immortal power. Once Lu Feng cultivated it to the grand completion realm, then just 1 type of supreme immortal power would be equivalent to 3 types of supreme power. Moreover, Lu Feng had an inexplicable feeling that his great devil power and monarch power weren't simple either. Just like the primitive immortal power, they weren't simple either. The great devil power was the ultimate power produced by the great devil true body, a supreme technique that was comparable to the primordial scripture. It was equally terrifying. It wasn't something that ordinary people could imagine. The monarch power was even more terrifying. Its existence originated from Lu Feng's bizarre predecessor. It could be said that this monarch's power was absolutely peerless and terrifying. With these 3 supreme immortal powers, Lu Feng was confident that once they reached greater mastery, he wouldn't be afraid even if he faced an existence that had comprehended 6 or even 7 supreme immortal powers. As if sensing Lu Feng's terrifying fighting spirit, the immortal king smiled and nodded. He said slowly, "Monarch, I know you are great. However, in this era that originally belonged to you, it is no longer your era. A long time ago, countless existences used their shocking power to penetrate through history and calculate the terror of this era. They calculated that this era would be the most miraculous era. Therefore, many existences chose to remain dormant in order to reach the end. Therefore, in this era, countless truly shocking existences will appear. Their existence will disturb this spacetime. Monarch, the monstrous geniuses that appear in this era will be the most extreme generation after the immortal devil era. Moreover, the true target of the many experts who have come is the original supreme figure of this era, which is you. Therefore, work hard to become stronger. Otherwise, you will lose not only the glory of the monarch, but also your life. When the two of them walked out of the space, everyone's expression was extremely strange. They all watched the two of them disappear in front of everyone's eyes. Even the 11 great alchemy grandmasters, who were comparable to any alchemy masters in the king realm, couldn't sense it. It was obvious how secret the conversation between them was. These people also wanted to know what the two of them had said. Unfortunately, they all understood that they would never know. Alright, let's continue. I have failed the first round. Hearing the immortal king admit defeat, a strange expression flashed across everyone's face. After Lu Feng fully injected his mental power, the entire spirit origin crystal turned completely transparent. Such a change stunned everyone. However, no one understood the meaning behind it. After all, turning milky white meant the appearance of immortal power. No one could explain why it was completely transparent. However, these people had already guessed it. After all, they all knew a little about the existence of the spirit origin crystal. According to legend, the color of the spirit origin crystal would change according to the affinity of the mental power with the divine object. Although they didn't know what kind of power Lu Feng had displayed, he was able to directly turn the spirit origin crystal into a transparent color. This was enough to explain a lot of problems. After all, transparency was fainter than white. Now, when they heard the immortal king, who was incomparably arrogant and could be said to be a peerless monster, actually admitting defeat like this, many existences revealed a trace of disbelief. In their opinion, an existence like the immortal king would definitely not admit defeat, nor would he admit defeat. However, he admitted it. Taratus had unknowingly returned to his original position. He looked at Lu Feng, then at the immortal king, and finally nodded gently. Taratus couldn't see through either of these two people. Of course, he didn't need to see through them. After all, he was just an alchemist. In the first round of the test, the Wind God Region's Alchemist Guild's human race, Futu, wins. Do you have any objections? The 42 alchemists shook their heads. They really didn't have the slightest objection. The immortal king and Lu Feng's performance was more than one realm stronger than theirs. They simply didn't have any qualifications to have any objections. For Lu Feng, the one who was most qualified to question was the immortal king. Now that he had admitted defeat, what qualifications did these people have to question? In that case, let's proceed to the next test. The second test is the mental power test. Taratus had previously said that the first two tests were related to the alchemist's talent. Although it was a little unfair to them, no one could say anything. This world was originally an unfair world where the strong were respected. Moreover, this time, the test plan was jointly formulated by the 8 great grandmasters. They had no qualifications to resist. The mental power test is very simple. It is to inject your mental power. Every level has a level standard. Different levels of existence will be carried out according to different levels of standards. Among them, there were spiritual telekinesis masters, and the only great telekinesis master. It could be said that there were all 3 levels of telekinesis masters. Therefore, the test was also divided into 3 parts. Taratus took out a high-tech instrument from his personal space. Looking at the crowd, Taratus smiled slightly and said, This is the mental power test instrument I specially obtained from the Psychic Guild. Of course, it is different from the instrument you used before. I know that the mental strength testing device you used in the past is able to accurately measure your mental strength. Many of the existences nodded their heads lightly. This instrument is actually simpler. It is more accurate to measure your mental power level. When you use the instrument, continuously inject your mental power and the value will appear here. It can collect all of your mental power and measure it. At the last moment, it will obtain a mental power limit coefficient. The higher the coefficient, the greater the limit of your mental power. Hearing this, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a strange look. All of you, do you understand? Many existences answered in agreement. Then, Taratus asked these geniuses and monsters to come up one by one and began to inject their mental power into the instrument. After seeing a few people, everyone understood the meaning behind it. The ones who started the test were all spiritual telekinesis masters. Their mental power was in the range of 100,000 to 1 million. Of course, this only referred to the quality of their mental power. Now that all of their mental power had been injected into the instrument, the value was no longer useful. The first spiritual telekinesis master had already reached the peak of the realm. Such an existence's mental power was at least 900,000 units. However, the limit of his mental power injected into the instrument was 3 million units. In other words, he could continuously release 3 million units of mental power. It was more than 3 times the 900,000 units he should have. At this time, the instrument showed a number of 3. 11. Later, the 19 level 3 alchemists started the test one by one. The results came out very quickly. Lu Feng found that the mental power limit coefficient of these telekinesis masters was mostly between 3.0 and 4.0. Even if there were some monsters, it was only 4.5. It was only 4.5. There was nothing above that. Soon, it was the turn of the 22 monstrous telekinesis masters. The first monstrous telekinesis master was also a spiritual telekinesis master. Of course, the 22 monstrous alchemists here were all spiritual telekinesis masters. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to reach the level of a level 4 alchemist. They were different from those genius alchemists. The mental power limit of these monstrous alchemists was obviously much higher. The most ordinary monstrous alchemist's mental power limit coefficient reached 6.0 and above. A few people even reached 9.0 and above. Among them, the most outstanding one was the alchemy genius from the Underworld clan. Lu Feng also knew that person. Previously, when he was in the testing center, he saw Grandmaster Yuanling take him for a level 4 alchemist appraisal. At that time, Lu Feng knew that this person was Yuanling's third disciple, who was also known as the most talented disciple. Of course, when he saw the number above, Lu Feng also knew that the most talented disciple wasn't bragging. The mental power limit of this young disciple of Grandmaster Yuanling had reached a terrifying 10.0 and above. Such a number was frightening. In other words, his mental power was equivalent to 10 times that of a telekinesis master of the same level. Finally, it was Lu Feng and the Immortal King's turn again. Everyone's eyes were focused on them again. They were all paying close attention to Lu Feng and the Immortal King. After all, the two of them were simply too unimaginable. It could be said that both of them were true monsters at the peak. They were both well-deserved monsters of this era. With such an existence, they could naturally attract all the attention. Looking at the instrument, the Immortal King smiled slightly and finally shook his head gently. This kind of test is not suitable for me, nor is it suitable for him. He raised his arm gently and pointed at Lu Feng. This kind of test was a joke to the two of them. Hearing this, everyone was slightly taken aback. This time, let's consider it a draw. Let's directly proceed to the next test. Countless people looked at the Immortal King strangely. Although everyone knew how terrifying he was, they all understood that he would definitely surpass all other existences. However, he didn't even take the test and directly said that he had won. This was really a little too arrogant. Looking at the expressions of those monstrous geniuses at this moment, many existences knew that these people were most likely unconvinced. Finally, a monstrous genius slowly walked out. Immortal King, I know that you are unparalleled. However, isn't it a little too difficult to convince the masses by claiming victory without going through any tests? Many existences recognized the person who spoke. This person was the monstrous genius from the underworld tribe who had previously set the highest record. Behind him was Yuanling. It could be said that he didn't care much about the Immortal King and Lu Feng. Therefore, he directly said it. This time, the monstrous genius from the underworld tribe's words clearly received the approval of many people. They all nodded slightly and looked at the Immortal King and Lu Feng strangely. Even if we lose, we still have to count our losses clearly and understand everything clearly. Therefore, please take the test. Chapter 405. The Immortal King stood there quietly. Although he was still smiling, there was a trace of contempt in his smile. This was a kind of arrogance, a kind of dominance. I used to look down on the entire universe. Although this era no longer belongs to me, I am still the noblest Immortal King. No one, no power, can make me do things I don't like. A king should have the glory and pride of a king. How could the Immortal King accept the coercive words of these people? Both sides were in a stalemate. The Nether race's monstrous genius and the Immortal King looked at each other. However, his expression didn't look good. Although he was a high-level King Psychic Master, which was almost a level higher than the Immortal King of Spiritual Masters, when he really faced an Immortal King, he finally understood the terrifying pressure. He finally understood the despair of Yuan Yuan. Everyone looked at the two of them quietly. Many existences were happy to see such a scene. After all, such a scene was obviously many times better than a pill refiner's test. However, just when everyone thought that a great battle was about to break out, a cold voice suddenly pierced through the air. Is this enough? Following the voice, everyone looked over. However, when they saw everything, they were all stunned. The person who spoke was Lu Feng. There was nothing strange about this, nor was there anything shocking about it. However, what shocked many existences at this moment was the number on the instrument in front of Lu Feng. Am I seeing things? A spirit master muttered to himself, as if he couldn't believe the number he saw. However, no one beside him could answer him, because these people were also stunned. Looking at the number on the monitor, everyone was incomparably silent and lifeless. As for the Nether race's monstrous genius who fought against the Immortal King, his face was deathly pale at this moment. Lu Feng didn't say anything to him. He used his own actions to prove everything. With an incomparably cold smile, Lu Feng looked at the Underworld clan's monstrous genius whose face was deathly pale and said slowly, "Actually, the reason why we didn't take the test was not because we were afraid. In fact, it was because we didn't want to give you a blow." Lu Feng's words were even more unbearable than the Immortal King's. However, when they saw the number, no one could say anything. At this moment, the numbers on it made it impossible for them to refute anything. 100, it was actually the number 100. Is this possible? Taradas took a deep breath. Today, he had been shocked too much. Whether it was the Celestial King or Lu Feng, the shock that they gave him was something that he had never experienced in his life. He really didn't know what to say. After a long silence, Taradas slowly said, "This instrument also has its limits. And the limit is a coefficient of 100. Hearing this, the corners of many people's mouths twitched slightly. Taradas's words undoubtedly showed that this mental limit of 100 times was not Lu Feng's limit at all. This Futu of the human clan couldn't be tested with this instrument at all. Taradas turned around and looked at those dumbfounded people. He sighed softly and said slowly, "This time, is there any objection?" What objection could there be? The strongest person didn't even have 1/10 of the other party's strength. What objection could there be? In the end, the Celestial King didn't go up. At this time, no one bothered about it anymore. Because they didn't want to be hit again. Taradas understood that after Lu Feng's performance, there shouldn't be any objections. After all, no one liked to be hit by such extreme blows again and again. After a long time, no one said anything. Looking at this scene, Taradas nodded gently. Then, the second time, it's a draw. The limit of this instrument was 100 times. And he believed that whether it was Lu Feng or the Celestial King, they would definitely be able to have 100 times. Therefore, the two of them couldn't determine the winner at all. It could only be considered a draw. After 2 rounds, Lu Feng was considered to be in the lead. Such a result was incomparably unexpected to these people. How powerful and terrifying was the Celestial King from before? He had at least 6 supreme powers. With such aptitude, he could be said to be the #1 person in this era. Even the #1 monstrous genius, Lu Feng, who had caused a lot of commotion before, probably couldn't compare to him. But even so, he was still behind by a bit. Such an outcome was incomparably shocking. Finally, the third round began. According to Taradas, this third round was the real test of alchemy. Therefore, this time, many geniuses and monstrous geniuses were eyeing covetously. Aptitude was something that was innate. They were powerless to change anything. If they lost, they naturally couldn't say anything. But alchemy was different. Because alchemy wasn't something that one's aptitude could completely determine. Whether it was the Celestial King or Lu Feng, their performance was too young. They didn't believe that such a person could really defeat them on the path of alchemy. The assessment this time is a test of the quality of the pills. A third-grade alchemist will refine a third-grade pill. A fourth-grade alchemist will refine a fourth-grade pill. In the end, everything will be determined by the quality of the finished pill. No one had any objections. And Lu Feng was the same. At this moment, everyone looked at the Celestial King. Because until now, they had overlooked a problem, and that was the Celestial King's alchemist level. When he appeared, multicolored light shone, and countless resonances appeared in the Medicine God's square. This was a great phenomenon. And many existences were also attracted by this phenomenon, so until now, they still didn't know the Celestial King's alchemist level. The Celestial King naturally knew the doubts of many existences. He smiled slightly and said slowly, "I'm considered a fourth grade." Although he was a fourth-grade alchemist, this fourth-grade alchemist was too special. These people nodded gently and didn't say anything. After glancing at many existences, Taradas said, "The assessment, let's begin." In an instant, many existences took out the third-grade and fourth-grade divine objects from their exclusive space. This assessment didn't have a time limit. However, these people understood that if they really used a day or two to refine a pill, even if they refined a perfect pill, it would probably be considered a failure. Therefore, these people used all their speed to take out the divine items and began to refine them as fast as they could. The Celestial King didn't move, and Lu Feng's movements weren't that fast. Regarding refining medicinal pills, he did not have the slightest bit of worry at all. This was because Lu Feng knew that with the primitive immortal power, the quality of the pills he refined wasn't something these people could compare with. Seeing Lu Feng methodically take out things, the Celestial King hesitated for a moment, but still walked to Lu Feng's side. "Give me some of the divine items." Hearing this, Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. He looked at the Celestial King strangely. The Celestial King seemed to have never experienced such a scene. Thinking about how respected his status was in the past. When had he ever asked for fourth-grade divine objects? But this time, he really had no other choice. He had divine objects and many, many more. but he really didn't have the ability to refine those divine objects. Not to mention him, even among all the people here, no one had the ability to refine them. Therefore, he had no choice but to ask Lu Feng. Looking at the embarrassed Celestial King, Lu Feng seemed to think of himself in the Wind God Territory's Alchemist Guild. Lu Feng smiled lightly and directly took out some fourth-grade divine objects from his exclusive space. He didn't ask the Celestial King what divine objects he needed, because he knew that the Celestial King could refine any divine object. Just like him, he didn't need anything special at all. Sure enough, the Celestial King didn't care about what it was at all. He just nodded slightly at Lu Feng. It seemed that there was nothing else to do. Lu Feng finally began to refine the pills. During the time when he was in the Wind God Territory's Alchemist Guild, he had already refined countless fourth-grade pills. His refining speed was terrifyingly fast. Moreover, most of the finished pills were of the perfect grade. Even the complete grade pills were very rare. As for the incomplete ones, there wasn't a single one at all. Therefore, Lu Feng refining medicinal pills was also considered a walk in the park. Soon, Lu Feng used his mental strength to forcefully hold up 10 types of divine object. A fourth-grade pill needed to extract the essence of at least 4 types of fourth-grade divine objects before it could be fused into one. Of course, there was a limit at most, which was 10 types. Lu Feng chose 10 types not to pretend. But he had his own ideas. Lu Feng knew that he would be facing a lot of freaks in this pill concoction. These freaks were all people who had been in the realm of Grade 4 alchemists for a long time. Their familiarity with Grade 4 medicinal pills was no less than his own. If he wanted to win, then ordinary methods would no longer work. Therefore, Lu Feng chose to use both quantity and quality to completely suppress his opponent. Other than Lu Feng, the Celestial King and the Underworld clan's monster obviously made the same choice. They all used 10 types. Of course, other than them, there were also monsters who used many divine objects. However, there were only 9 types at most. After all, 10 types were still too time-consuming and risky. 10 types of divine objects floated quietly in the air, being dragged by Lu Feng with his powerful mental strength. Lu Feng didn't move. Instead, he remained silent. At this moment, he seemed to be accumulating something. After looking at those divine objects for a long time, Lu Feng gradually felt that he seemed to have entered a strange state. It was a kind of control, a feeling of complete control. Feeling the constantly flowing power between his hands and in all the space around his body, Lu Feng's lips curled into a strange smile. After a long time, he let out a long sigh of relief. Primitive immortal power, the most primitive immortal power that can give birth to everything. It turns out that that strange power is such a great existence. At this moment, Lu Feng thought of what the Celestial King said to him in the alternate space. Chapter 406. Lu Feng already knew that there was more than one type of immortal power. There were 3. Chaos immortal power, law immortal power, and creation immortal power. The 3 types of immortal power had 3 different uses. However, his primitive immortal power was the highest grade immortal power that could evolve into any kind of immortal power. It could be said that his immortal power was the most terrifying immortal power. Primitive, this was definitely not a casual term. What this represented was the starting point, the highest level of power. Since my primitive immortal power can evolve and control, then why can't I control it? Lu Feng was silent. He was quietly thinking about everything. After a long while, he let out a long sigh. At this moment, Lu Feng quietly opened his eyes. No one could see the hint of excitement that quietly flashed through Lu Feng's eyes. Actually, it's not that the primitive immortal power can't evolve into immortal power, it's just that I didn't let it evolve. Immortal power was always a kind of power. And he was the one who could control immortal power. He had changed according to the changes in his will. After thinking this through, Lu Feng also showed a trace of excitement. He tried to give this strange power a way to completely control his emotions. At this moment, Lu Feng was pleasantly surprised to find that his mental power really did have a feeling of control. All the profound mysteries of the laws are the existence of laws. And this law immortal power is the existence that can control the laws. Unfortunately, the level of my immortal power is too low. It's already very good to be able to control some things. It's impossible to control the laws. However, one day, I will be able to reach that step. Lu Feng firmly believed in this point. He firmly believed that he would definitely be able to reach that great peak. The immortal king's words were still vivid in his mind, but Lu Feng no longer cared about them. He even felt a sense of excitement. He was an emperor. If he only suppressed an ordinary person, then he would only be an ordinary emperor. Only those terrifying monsters were the ones he wanted to suppress. Only those existences were able to ignite the urge to truly battle. Many of the monstrous geniuses who shook the era? Good, very good. I, Lu Feng, will be waiting for you. The primitive immortal force was Lu Feng's greatest reliance as a spiritual master and alchemy master. Now that Lu Feng had truly comprehended its essence, the utilization of the primitive immortal force had reached a whole new level. Using immortal energy that belonged to the laws of nature to control everything to refine pills, it was simply too easy. In an instant, a terrifying mental strength spread out and rushed into the 10-grade, 4 divine objects in the void. In the next moment, these divine items actually changed the moment Lu Feng began to draw the runes. Seeing this scene, the expressions of countless existences changed drastically. However, they, who had experienced so many shocking changes before, only had a twisted and ugly expression on their faces this time. They didn't lose their composure. It turns out that the last time really wasn't his limit. A grade 6 alchemy master was extremely shocked when he saw Lu Feng refine 10 divine objects at once at such a fast speed. He still vaguely remembered Lu Feng's terrifying speed when he had refined 4 divine objects at the same time for the first time a few days ago. It had taken him 6 minutes. When 6 minutes had passed, Lu Feng had actually finished extracting the essence. At this moment, although the countless existences were mostly immune to it, they still couldn't help but suck in a deep breath of cold air. Lu Feng's performance was really too shocking. Although grade 4 elixirs refined with 10 divine objects were still elixirs, their effects had already reached a terrifying level. In order to refine elixirs made with 10 divine objects, one's control had to reach a shocking level. Naturally, the speed was also incomparably slow. After all, when most alchemists refined elixirs this way, they had to refine all 10 divine objects one by one. For someone like Lu Feng to refine 10 divine objects at the same time at such a terrifying speed, it was simply infuriating. The benefits of having a mental strength coefficient that exceeded the limit of 100 times are really obvious. 100 times before Lu Feng, they had never seen or heard of such an existence, and now they had finally witnessed it. They also finally understood what it meant. With such an unlimited mental strength backing him up, coupled with that terrifying control, if he wants to refine elixirs, he can completely ignore any loss of mental strength. He doesn't have any worries at all, Terada sighed slightly. Alchemists were most afraid of not being able to control and not having enough mental strength when refining elixirs. The latter was easier. After all, when alchemists wanted to refine a shocking elixir, they would prepare some divine objects and elixirs that could replenish mental strength in advance. However, the existence of this control was not so easy. After all, the control was related to the soul. Finally, at the 8th minute, Lu Feng actually completed the refinement of the 10 extracted essences. Seeing this scene, everyone was speechless. Refining a 4th-grade elixir in 8 minutes wasn't difficult. It really wasn't difficult. The existence of an alchemy master could do it. Although it was a little difficult, many alchemy masters could do it. However, such a result was really unbelievable for a fourth-grade alchemist to do it. The moment Lu Feng finished, the Immortal King also finished refining his elixir. Seeing this scene, these people took in a deep breath. Previously, they were all attracted by Lu Feng's refining and actually forgot the existence of the Immortal King for a short time. When they looked over, they found that the Immortal King had also extracted the essence of 10 divine objects and refined them at the same time. These two are truly undefeatable monsters. Many of the spectators who had come to watch all sighed deeply. They never thought that such a scene would happen. These existences knew that there would be some shocking figures in the young grand competition of the Alchemist Conference. However, the people who appeared this time were a little too shocking. However, although they lost their composure many times and were shocked many times. However, those people were fond of this sort of scene. Because for them, although they couldn't participate, being able to witness it was already a supreme honor. I just don't know how the quality of their refinement is, the people below whispered. They all knew that the winner of the third round of the competition would definitely be born from these two people. The other monstrous geniuses and the previous vow had already become a thing of the past. In front of such two monstrous geniuses, no matter from any perspective, they were far from being on the same level as these two people. The elixir refined by the two of them was placed in front of Taratus at the same time. Taratus wasn't in a hurry to look at it. He just held the two elixirs in the air with his mental power. Seeing this scene, many existences immediately understood. Taratus wanted to wait until everyone was done before he judged them together. 50 minutes later, one of the monstrous geniuses who used 9 types of grade 4 divine items to refine elixirs finished refining his elixir. As he respectfully walked in front of Taratus, a trace of shame appeared on the face of the monstrous alchemist. "Teacher, I've disappointed you." This monstrous genius was one of the 10 monstrous geniuses sent out by the Alchemist Guild. He was also the most monstrous genius among them and was Taratus's disciple. Seeing the shame on his disciple's face, Taratus smiled faintly and gently patted his disciple's shoulder. "Child, you don't have to apologize. In fact, what you did was already good enough. None of this is your fault. It wasn't something you could control. Being born in the same era as the two of them is a tragedy." Hearing this, a helpless look appeared in the monstrous genius' eyes. Yes, being born in the same era as Lu Feng and the Immortal King was truly a tragedy. They were already outstanding enough. Otherwise, they wouldn't have become monstrous existences. However, compared to the two monstrous geniuses in front of them, they were still lacking. Moreover, the difference wasn't just a little bit. It was a distance that was enough to make them despair. Don't be too disappointed. Your talent is already amazing enough. Moreover, you shouldn't compare yourself to the two of them. At this moment, a trace of relief appeared on the disciple's face. Indeed, Taratus was right. He could completely not compare himself to Lu Feng and the Immortal King. Although they were from the same era, there was no reason to compare between them. Moreover, there was nothing to be ashamed of if he failed in front of such existences. Just as this disciple was feeling relieved, the monstrous genius of the underworld race finally finished refining his elixir. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng revealed a slightly strange expression. He still remembered that during the assessment, this disciple seemed to have wasted a lot of time. At that time, Wan Huihui and Gu Gue had maliciously ridiculed him. Now that he thought about it, this monstrous genius should have been hiding his strength at that time. Otherwise, if it was just refining a few elixirs of 4 types of 4th-grade divine items, 2 hours would have been enough. Seeing that Lu Feng and the Immortal King had finished refining, a gloomy expression appeared on the face of the underworld race's monstrous genius. Before coming, he had already determined that he would definitely be the champion this time. The only thing he needed to consider was how to win the championship this time. However, when it really started, he realized that he was wrong. What he thought was completely wrong. When Lu Feng and the Immortal King appeared, he had already become a supporting character. He was even an insignificant and dispensable supporting character. Everything about him was so laughable in front of the two of them. Everything that he was so proud of was completely shattered in front of the two of them. This was really hard for him to accept. The blow to his aptitude did not completely disappoint him or make him lose confidence. He knew that his strength lay in the path of alchemy. Although his aptitude might be slightly inferior. However, he believed that with his many years of experience, defeating the two children would definitely not be a problem. However, the outcome was so tragic. All of his pride had been completely shattered by reality. Chapter 407. Finally, after waiting for a long time, some people finished refining their elixirs one after another. Many people were able to finish refining their elixirs as quickly as possible. However, they had the same thoughts as Lu Feng and the others. Therefore, very few of them chose to refine their elixirs using 4 different types of divine items. Among them, the least they chose was at least 6 types. Evildoers had to have the identity and behavior of an evildoer. After a full 2 hours, all the refinements were finally completed. Compared to these evildoers, the other geniuses refined their elixirs much faster. Their refining speed was relatively fast. Normally, they would finish refining their elixirs within an hour or so. Grade 3 elixirs were rarely complicated. As for the more complicated ones, these first-level Grade 3 alchemy geniuses were unable to control them. Therefore, they simply put all their attention on speed and quality. In front of the 11 alchemy grandmasters were 44 Grade 3 and Grade 4 elixirs. Everyone below had a fervent look on their faces. Grade 3 elixirs might not be much, but Grade 4 elixirs were very useful to anyone below the god level. Moreover, these Grade 4 elixirs were not ordinary elixirs. Among these elixirs, at least 6 types of divine items were refined and fused into a Grade 4 elixir. The effect was much stronger than an ordinary elixir made with 4 types of divine items. Unfortunately, everyone knew that these elixirs were not fated with them. Casually picking up an elixir, Taradas revealed a satisfied look. Although they had used more than 6 types of divine items, these evildoers were still evildoers after all. Their limits were very terrifying. These elixirs that were successfully refined had already explained everything. It's really not bad. All 44 of these evildoers chose to refine 6 types of divine items or more. Not a single one of them failed. This is really not bad at all. 44 refinements without a single failure. Such a result made the 11 alchemy grandmasters very satisfied. Looking at the elixir in his hand, Taradas said slowly, "Refined from 7 types of divine items, it has reached a complete quality. Not bad at all." After saying this, Taradas looked at the 10 alchemy grandmasters beside him and said slowly, "Do you have any objections?" Many of the alchemy grandmasters shook their heads gently. The so-called 11 alchemy grandmasters examining the elixirs together was a joke. They were all alchemy grandmasters. Apart from those 3 people, they were at the peak of the universe. If they couldn't even determine the quality of a Grade 4 elixir, they would really be ashamed and resentful to commit suicide. Alright, 4 elixirs each. Let's examine them carefully. With a wave of his hand, the 40 pills split into 10 portions and flew towards the 10 alchemy grandmasters. The 10 of them did not hesitate at all and directly began to test the quality of the medicinal pills. 7 types of divine items, perfect quality. 6 types of divine items, incomplete quality. 8 types of divine items, incomplete quality, the alchemy grandmasters. Finally, everyone to Tito the end, Taradas to alchemy to the alchemy Taradas to time. These people knew that the two most eye-catching crystals were placed in front of Taradas. Feeling everyone's gaze on him, Taradas smiled and finally picked up the 3 pills in front of him. The first elixir he picked up was from the underworld race's monster. After observing it for a while, he nodded gently and said slowly, "Not bad. The essence of 10 types of divine items, complete quality." Wow! Voices rang out from the void. Even though it was overshadowed by the 2 monstrous geniuses, this result was still extremely sensational. Everyone's eyes were filled with respect as they looked at the Nether clan's monster genius. To be able to fuse 10 types of divine items and refine a grade 4 elixir, the quality of the elixir was complete. This was undoubtedly terrifying. Among the people present, he was the most powerful one. Finally, Taradas took out another elixir. When they saw this elixir, all the noise disappeared. Everyone waited for the result to be announced. After a long time, Taradas sighed softly. This sigh made everyone's heart skip a beat. The essence of 10 types of divine items, perfect quality. Perfect? It was actually perfect. Although they had thought of this possibility before, they still couldn't help but exclaim in shock when this result really happened. However, that was all. After all, with the existence of the monster's innate talent, it was reasonable for him to have such a performance. Monster, he is indeed a monster. A monstrous genius at the epic level is indeed incomparable to an ordinary person. Although the difference between complete and perfect is only one word, the difference in quality is one level. Moreover, Futu and the immortal king of the human race completed it in less than 10 minutes. To be able to refine 10 types of perfect elixir in less than 10 minutes, how far can these 2 people go in the future? Hearing this, the crowd seemed to have thought of something. For a moment they were silent. They were indeed shocked by the terrifying talents of Lu Feng and the immortal king. They had even forgotten the significance of all this. Saint Alchemy Master? Or at least a Saint Alchemy Master. At the very least, I guess. If such a monstrous talent couldn't become a Saint Alchemy Master, no one would believe it. After all this represented that it had already surpassed the limits of what a young Saint Alchemy Master could achieve. However, when they thought of the possibility of surpassing a Saint Alchemy Master, everyone was completely silent. Taradas sighed deeply and said slowly, "Saint Alchemy Master isn't the end of the alchemy Tao. There are even more terrifying legends and even more powerful existences above the Saint Alchemy Master. According to the legends, such existences have never appeared since the Immortal Demon era and the Alchemy era. Divine Alchemy Master, Divine Alchemy Master." Even people who didn't know anything knew the meaning of these 3 words. A Saint Alchemy Master could refine 8th grade legendary grade elixirs. A Divine Alchemy Master was an existence that could refine divine elixirs. Divine elixirs were the true immortal elixirs. Only the existence of the divine pill was worthy of the title of immortal pill. Divine elixirs were extremely useful for the divine king. In this era and the eras before, there were many divine kings that relied on divine elixirs to live beyond the limits of their lifespan. For the sake of a divine elixir, the human king even personally destroyed a divine king. After the end of the Immortal Demon era and the Alchemy era, the refinement of divine elixirs had become a legend. At the same time, divine elixirs became rarer and rarer. If a divine alchemy master really appeared in this era, then the entire universe's divine king would go crazy. The status of a divine alchemy master was not something that any divine king could compare to. Thinking that these 2 monstrous geniuses had the possibility of becoming a divine alchemy master, these people were filled with endless shock. Of course, this was only a possibility. But if there was a possibility, then there was hope. After all, since the end of the alchemy era, not to mention a divine alchemy master, there was not even a single monstrous genius with the potential to become a divine alchemy master. Now, after being crowned as a potential divine alchemy master, the status of these two people began to rise infinitely. No wonder they dared to publicly display their monstrous talents in front of so many people. Indeed, as long as it doesn't threaten the safety of their own race, then no one will dare to touch these two people. Because once the news of today's incident spreads, then the ones who want to protect them will not be any race, but the Supremes. The entire universe's divine king will protect them. These two people were incomparably precious existences to the divine king. After all, once either Lu Feng or the immortal king reached the divine alchemy master realm, then these divine king would have the possibility of living a second, third, or even 100th life. Therefore, before confirming that these two people really could not become divine alchemy masters, they would be their true guardians. Taratus looked at the two of them and sighed slowly. He did not say anything else. He knew that if these two people had displayed their talents in the past, perhaps they would have really reached the heavens in a single step and become one of the most respected people in the universe. Unfortunately, it was not possible now. The current era was different. The other 11 alchemy masters had the same expression in their eyes. After becoming divine alchemy masters, Lu Feng and the immortal king's statuses would really change dramatically. However, they were still far from reaching the level where the divine king would protect them. It was not that the divine king did not need divine pills and did not want to live another life, but it was not allowed in this era. Everything was because of a curse that the divine king would not have a good ending. If they could not even survive, then how could they live a second or third life? Therefore, although these two people had the potential to become divine alchemy masters, their true status was not as terrifying as imagined. Casually taking the pill refined by the immortal king, Taratus only needed to take a quick look before he concluded, the essence of 10 divine items, perfect quality. Sure enough, everyone nodded in both shock and understanding. The victors this time are still the human race's Fudu and the immortal king. I believe that no one has any objections. Hearing this result, everyone was silent, completely silent. Objections? How could they possibly have them? At this moment, all the 42 monstrous geniuses and geniuses felt a kind of sorrow, a kind of great sorrow. If they had been in the previous era, they would have definitely been glorious and would have become proud geniuses. But now they had completely become background characters. They did not even have the chance to shine. This was a kind of great sorrow. Chapter 408. Taratus could empathize with these people's feelings. Being born in the same era as Lu Feng and the immortal king was indeed a great tragedy. If they were still monstrous geniuses, they would probably have the same mentality now. Unfortunately, they couldn't open their mouths to help these people walk out of the shadows. Taratus sighed softly and said slowly, "Then, let's proceed to the last test. In the past, there was only one test, and that was the final test, pill refinement. Now, it was placed at the end and became the test that would decide everything." Everyone's eyes focused on the sky again. They quietly looked at the 44 monstrous geniuses on the void arena. They knew that the real climax, the real peak, was about to arrive. Some people were slightly puzzled and asked, "Didn't we just compete? Why do we have to continue?" Hearing their companions' words, many people smiled slightly. Those who understood alchemy began to explain. Previously, the test was to test the quality of the pill. There were no requirements for the pills, so many people chose to refine the pills that were easy to refine. Although it looked gorgeous, these alchemists sought stability and didn't have any meaning to stand out. But it's different now. They are going to refine the real pill. Only this time, in order to be truly brilliant, they have to break through their limits and refine the best pill they can. It can be said that the last test is the real highlight. There may be failures, but once they succeed, it means that they have surpassed their limits. Such explanations continued to ring out, and many people nodded in understanding. They finally knew the reason. One is to seek stability and the other is to break through. This is where the fundamental difference lies. And in the final refining, all kinds of refining methods will appear one after another. Although these monstrous geniuses and geniuses' levels are very low, once they use it, it will be very beautiful. Hearing the words of their companions, many people's hearts were ignited. They were looking forward to it even more. The final test is your last chance. Whether or not you can break the demon in your heart depends on this. Taradas' voice rang clearly in the ears of the 42 freaks. They looked at Taradas and were all unusually silent. Taradas said nothing. He knew that some things couldn't be solved just by talking about it. Whether they could succeed or not still depended on themselves. Alright, this is the last test. The time limit is 3 hours. Once the time is up, those who do not succeed will be considered to have failed the test. 3 hours was more than enough. In the past, it was only 1 hour. This time, the time was increased to 3 hours. Taradas also had his own ideas. He knew that because of the oppression of the 2 freaks, the Celestial King and Lu Feng, many geniuses had already walked to the edge of an abyss. This was their last chance. They would definitely do everything they could to break through to the next realm. If that was the case, failure was inevitable. Therefore, in order to give these monstrous geniuses a chance to succeed, Taradas increased the time to 3 hours. He turned around and saw that the 10 grandmasters had all nodded in agreement. They naturally knew the meaning behind Taradas's actions. Among the 44 freaks present, many of them had a lot to do with them. And they naturally hoped that these people would have a chance to break through or even break their shackles. Seeing that no one objected, Taradas slowly said, "Let's begin. Do you still have any divine items here?" Looking at Lu Feng, the Celestial King was slightly embarrassed. This was the second time he had asked Lu Feng for divine items. In his previous plan, he didn't even need to wait for the final stage to arrive, because he felt that he could completely defeat Lu Feng before the third test. But who would have thought that there would be such a result in the end? In the end, he even fell behind Lu Feng. It could be said that he had failed in this competition. No matter what the outcome of the last test was, it was impossible for him to defeat Lu Feng. However, as a monstrous genius who defied the heavens and surpassed the greatest existence of the Supreme King, how could he admit defeat so casually? Therefore, he wanted to fight to the end. If he won the last test, although it would be a tie overall, it would still be a failure. Similarly, this tie would also be a failure for Lu Fenglai. Both of them were existences who wanted to fight to the end. A tie was unacceptable for the Supreme Immortal and the Supreme King. It could be seen as a failure. Hearing the Celestial King's words, Lu Feng nodded gently. Although he was in the lead now, just as the Celestial King thought, once he failed the last test and it became a tie, then he would be considered a failure. And Lu Feng didn't want to fail. Perhaps in terms of combat, he was still far from being a match for the Celestial King. Even in a battle of the same realm, he wasn't a match for the Celestial King. But this didn't mean that Lu Feng was willing to admit defeat. Just because he couldn't do it now didn't mean that he couldn't do it in the future. Besides being a martial artist, Lu Feng couldn't tolerate failure in other aspects. He was the Emperor Lu Feng. Looking at the 4th grade divine items that Lu Feng took out from his exclusive space, the Celestial King hesitated for a moment. In the end, he shook his head gently. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng was slightly stunned. Could it be that he didn't like these divine items? Seeing Lu Feng's confused eyes, the Celestial King was silent for a moment before he slowly said, "These divine items won't do. Their levels are too low." In an instant, Lu Feng's eyes trembled slightly. The moment he heard this, Lu Feng already knew what it meant. 4th grade divine items weren't enough. Then, they needed at least 5th grade divine items. But if they were refined with 5th grade divine items, they would be high grade 5th grade pills. You have already become a master of alchemy. The Celestial King smiled and shook his head gently. The path of alchemy has never been my pursuit. So, if I had been willing to work hard back then it would have been possible for me to become a master of alchemy from my current level of spirit reader. Unfortunately, I'm not yet. The Celestial King was in existence at the level of spirit reader. Compared to Lu Fenglai, he was a whole level higher. And his talent was no less than Lu Feng's. After all, he was in the same realm. The current Lu Feng felt that he was no match for him at all. Lu Feng knew that he could become a 4th-grade pill master at the level of spirit reader. As long as he entered the level of spirit reader, he could definitely break through to the level of spirit reader. Therefore, the Celestial King, who was no less inferior to him in any aspect, could also do it. However, listening to his words, it seemed that the current Celestial King had not become a master of alchemy yet. However, Lu Feng soon understood. A strange light appeared in his eyes. Looking at the Celestial King, Lu Feng asked softly, "You want to take advantage of this assessment to break through?" In the eyes of others, the breakthrough that was extremely important was just a passing breakthrough in the hearts of these two people. Hearing Lu Feng's words, the Celestial King nodded slightly with a slightly evil smile. "Yes, anyway, my realm has already reached it. Then, I'll try to break through. After all, if I can't break through, then the outcome will be the same as before. At that time, I will still fail. A draw. If it was still a draw this time, then it would be 3 draws. However, he had already lost once before. If he failed this time, then he would be considered a complete failure. Therefore, he wanted to try and see if he could break through. Break through. Lu Feng nodded slightly but did not say anything. If possible, he also wanted to break through, but unfortunately, his current realm had already limited him. Lu Feng knew that no matter how heaven-defying he was, he could not break through the limits of his realm. Although he had primitive immortal power, extremely rich knowledge of alchemy, and even unlimited primitive immortal power, his realm was still limited. However, his cultivation level was still there. All of this had completely restricted him, making it impossible for him to break through. I only have these grade 5 divine items here. As for the rest, I think you should already have them. Lu Feng could imagine that since the Celestial King had already come into contact with the alchemist faction, then he must have a lot of resources related to alchemy in his hands. For example, he should also have pill formulas and the like. Sure enough, the Celestial King nodded slightly and said, "I also have a lot of things related to alchemy. I even have a lot of divine objects. Unfortunately, those are too precious. I don't have the qualifications to use them now." Lu Feng understood and did not say anything else. He just took out all the 5th-grade divine objects he had. The Celestial King took out a crystal stone. After looking at the records inside, he shook his head slightly and put the crystal stone back into his exclusive space. Just like that, the Celestial King kept looking at the contents of the crystal stone, one after another. It was not until he looked at more than 10 pieces in a row that he finally stopped. "Okay, that's it." Lu Feng also gave a lot of divine objects. There were more than 10 kinds. It was just that the refining of a 5th-grade high-level pill was completely different from a 4th-grade pill. The refining of a 5th-grade pill was not the process of extracting the essence of the divine objects, because from the 5th grade onwards, there was a real need for a pill formula. Therefore, the types of 5th-grade divine objects needed to be found according to the divine objects recorded in the pill formula. If used casually, then the result would definitely be failure. The refining of a 5th-grade pill was quite complicated, and the various requirements for the alchemist had reached the pinnacle. Otherwise, a 5th-grade alchemist would not be called an alchemy master. Seeing that the Celestial King had chosen 10 divine objects, Lu Feng secretly understood. He knew that the 5th-grade pill that the Celestial King wanted to refine this time should be the simplest kind of 5th-grade pill. A fourth-grade pill required at least the essence of 4 divine objects to be fused again before it could be refined. However, there were at least 10 kinds of fifth-grade pills. Among them, 5 divine objects were needed to be smelted and refined into a pill. Then, with the help of the other 5 divine objects, they would be fused continuously. According to the refining method and order on the pill formula, they would be fused continuously. Finally, a complete fifth-grade pill would be formed. It could be said that a pill that was just extracted with mental strength and refined like a fourth-grade pill was not a real fifth-grade pill. It was just a pill that had almost no effect. Only a complete pill could show the terrifying effect of power. It could be called a high-grade pill. Lu Feng watched as the Celestial King used his terrifying mental strength to hold up 10 fifth-grade divine objects. At this moment, a trace of shock appeared in his eyes. He knew that if the Celestial King could really smelt these divine objects, then he might really be able to successfully refine a true fifth-grade high-level pill. Chapter 409. Naturally, Lu Feng's strange behavior attracted the attention of many people. After all, both of them were the center of attention at this moment. It did not take long before these people noticed the 10 divine objects in front of the Celestial King. That's the yellow-green grass, right? I remember the yellow-green grass is a grade 5 divine object. Did the monster with the title Celestial King pick the wrong one? Many people began to discuss among themselves. One had to know that when alchemists were concocting pills, they absolutely needed to be quiet. However, at this moment, when they saw this strange scene, these people actually forgot to transmit their voices and chose to speak out directly. If this was any other time, the alchemists would have stopped them. However, at this moment, no one reprimanded them. After all, even the 11 alchemists seemed to have forgotten everything. They stared blankly at the scene in front of them. It's not just the yellow-green grass. The other one is the starlight frost. It's also a grade 5 divine object. The other one is the sky blue sea. It's also a grade 5 divine object. Many people began to discuss among themselves. Soon enough, the 10 divine objects hovering in front of the Celestial King were identified by many people. However, at this moment, most of the existences didn't feel excited because they recognized him. Instead, they were shocked. It was possible that the monster had picked the wrong one. However, could he have picked the wrong one? 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 Impossible. This was impossible. This could only mean one thing. Could it be? Could it be? How's this possible? How can this Celestial King be so freakish? A grade 5 pill. He's trying to refine a grade 5 pill. These people were all cultivators. Although they were not the strongest cultivators in the foreign battlefields, none of them were idiots. These people naturally understood everything. They naturally knew what this represented. Using 10 types of Tier 5 divine items meant one thing. The strongest genius of the new era, who was a titled Celestial King, was actually planning to refine a grade 5 high-grade pill. Monster. He's definitely a terrifying monster. Has he become an alchemy grandmaster? How can this be? In theory, Celestial Kings were on the same level as Lu Feng. After all, Lu Feng was only a great psyche master, but he was already a level 4 alchemist. Once Lu Feng became a spiritual reader, he could theoretically step into the realm of an alchemy master. However, all of this was just theory. All of this was just theory. There was a huge gap between a level 5 alchemy grandmaster and a level 4 alchemy grandmaster. It belonged to the barrier of the same level. It was very difficult to break through in such a simple way. Therefore, when they saw that the Immortal King was actually going to concoct a 5th-grade high-grade pill, many existences trembled from the bottom of their hearts. At this moment, no one paid any attention to the other alchemists. This was because there was nothing more shocking than the appearance of a spiritual reader master who could refine a level 5 high-grade medicinal pill. In history, there might have been a few sessions that were bigger than this one. However, there had never been a 5th-grade alchemy grandmaster in a single session. In the past, there has never been a single high-grade 5th-grade medicinal pill that appeared in such a grand competition. Is this going to start a new era? Is this a sign of the strong rise of our alchemy path? Taradas fell into a frenzy that he had never experienced before. To him, it didn't matter who was a monster. What he cared about was the prosperity and rise of the alchemy path. Many of the existences were slightly deranged. At this moment, the immortal king finally moved. His mental strength had completely poured into these divine objects in front of him. At this moment, there was silence between heaven and earth. Everyone was looking at those divine objects, waiting for the appearance of a miracle. Those alchemists in the grand competition also gave up on their movement. They all looked at the immortal king and those divine objects with all their hearts. Even Lu Feng was the same. Time passed by minute. 5 minutes later, those divine objects didn't change at all. 10 minutes later, it was still the same. 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Finally, when many people were slightly disappointed, when the 29th minute came, exclamations appeared. He really succeeded. The divine objects slowly changed. In the center of these divine objects, runes miraculously appeared. Some sparkling and translucent runes appeared. Those were ancient runes. Those were runes used to refine the essence of the divine objects. At this moment, it was already more than 90% successful. As long as he could successfully refine the essence of the 5th-grade divine object, it meant that he had already entered that realm and had the possibility of refining a 5th-grade medicinal pill. Lu Feng didn't continue watching. He already knew the outcome. Although Lu Feng didn't know the Immortal King's trump card, Lu Feng could feel that this was the most unsolvable monster that was not inferior to him in any aspect. He had incomparably many trump cards. There were 3 conditions for refining medicinal pills. The first was to refine the divine object, which was the realm. The second was mental strength, and the third was control. The Immortal King's mental strength was absolutely amazing. After all, the number that exceeded the limit of 100 times was enough to explain everything. As for control, to be able to surpass the 7 levels and have perfect control, how could such an existence's control be weak? Therefore, when the Immortal King was able to refine those divine objects, Lu Feng had already guessed the rest. Quietly looking at the 4th-grade divine objects in front of him, Lu Feng was silent. At this moment, he thought of a lot of things. He even had the urge to refine the 5th-grade divine object. However, Lu Feng didn't make a move because he knew that his realm really wasn't enough. Sometimes, miracles would be born, but unfortunately, they wouldn't be born at any time. They would be born at any time. Such a barrier couldn't be broken. Could it be that I have to admit defeat like this? The corner of his mouth was a trace of a bitter smile. In the past, Lu Feng had never admitted defeat. Even when he was just an ordinary existence back then, when he was only an intermediate martial artist and faced martial artists, he had never admitted defeat and had never yielded to anyone. But at this moment, he was facing an immortal king. It was a terrifying existence that made him admit that he wasn't a match for him in the same realm and in the confrontation that he was most proud of. Was he going to admit his failure at this moment? Was he going to admit his first failure? In his eyes, there was a helpless light. But gradually Lu Feng changed. A resolute light flashed in his eyes. Failure? I will fail, this is inevitable. But I have never admitted defeat without fighting. Even if I know that I will fail. But I will never admit defeat on my own initiative. I, Lu Feng, am not such an existence. His heart was beating violently. An incomparably firm will was gradually being released. Although he knew that he would fail, How could Lu Feng admit defeat? How could he think that he would fail? Even if I know that I am not a match for him in the same realm, if we really fight, I, Lu Feng, am not afraid of anything. I dared to face that kind of life and death battle. I was never afraid of that kind of life and death battle. And now, in the field of alchemy, am I going to admit defeat and retreat like this? No, no, no. I, Lu Feng, absolutely can't. At this moment, Lu Feng's heart was screaming crazily. His body was trembling violently. After a moment, a crazy thought appeared in his mind, but when that crazy look appeared in his eyes, this kind of thought could no longer be suppressed. Taboo! I don't care what taboo it is. Compared to failure, even if it is against the heavens, I will do it and dare to do it. If it is just a taboo, will I, Lu Feng, be afraid? Lu Feng had really gone crazy. In his heart there was no taboo, no worries. No matter what, as an emperor, he couldn't fail. He couldn't allow himself to fail. In the next moment, looking at the countless divine objects in front of him, he finally moved. Now, everyone's eyes were focused on the Immortal King. No one cared about Lu Feng at all. Although everyone knew that Lu Feng had a chance to catch up to the Immortal King, that was only a possibility. And the Immortal King was creating a miracle at this moment. In an instant, the 10 divine objects were completely refined and turned into the most primitive divine object essence. In the next moment, Lu Feng had already begun to condense crazily. Finally, when 6 minutes had passed, a perfect grade 4 pill appeared. To be able to refine a perfect grade 4 medicinal pill in 6 minutes, this kind of speed was undeniably shocking. It was a pity that no one paid attention to this. In their eyes, there was only the miracle of the Immortal King. Lu Feng no longer cared about the attitude of these people. At this moment, he had already fallen into his own madness. In order to win, he had already decided to touch the taboo. Touching the existence that had been listed as a taboo. No, not yet. In the next moment, Lu Feng began to refine crazily again. And this time, he didn't stop. One pill, another pill. When Lu Feng refined the 7th pill, a terrifying clamor sounded in his ears. Lu Feng diverted a portion of his attention and already knew the result. He really succeeded. The Immortal King, it's really the Immortal King. He's destined to be the supreme strongest of the younger generation. In this era, who can compare to him? Who has the qualifications to compare to him? Although it's only of inferior quality. But this was a 5th grade medicinal pill. As long as the refinement is successful, then the Immortal King is destined to be the winner of this competition. Terrifying, terrifying, truly incomparably terrifying. A defective grade 5 medicinal pill. It was a grade 5 pill. He really succeeded. Letting out a long sigh of relief, the Immortal King looked at the pill floating in front of him, and a trace of relief flashed in his eyes. Although this time success was nothing to him, it was nothing. But to be able to defeat Lu Feng, it was enough. Finally, he turned his gaze to Lu Feng. However, with one look, he was slightly puzzled. At this moment, the others also looked at Lu Feng. At the same time, the others were also slightly puzzled and slightly shocked. What an astonishing speed! To be able to refine a perfect grade pill with 10 types of divine items in 6 minutes. This speed, even an ordinary master can't do it. Amazing, amazing, incomparably amazing! If the Immortal King didn't refine a grade 5 pill, this Futta's performance wouldn't have failed. But, why is he constantly refining these grade 4 pills? Could it be that he wants to win through proficiency? You have to know that the final pill competition is only looking at one pill. Even if he refines 10,000 pills, it can't compare to one of the Immortal King's pills. No, I don't think it's that simple. This Futu is also a monstrous genius who is not inferior to the Immortal King. He shouldn't do such meaningless things. The last person's analysis clearly received the approval of many existences. They all nodded lightly and began to pay attention to Lu Fenglai. Chapter 410. The Immortal King watched Lu Feng quietly. No one knew what he was thinking at the moment. These people didn't want to know, because in the blink of an eye, Lu Feng had refined 3 more grade 4 elixir pills. At this point, the number of elixir pills floating quietly in front of Lu Feng had reached a total of 10. When the 10 elixir pills were refined, Lu Feng finally stopped. At this moment, he was also the center of everyone's attention. These people could vaguely sense that Lu Feng's crazy refining couldn't be a completely meaningless act. He must have his own plans. However, these people really couldn't figure out what Lu Feng's plan was. After all, the Immortal King could refine genuine grade 5 elixir pills. Lu Feng didn't seem to feel the gazes of so many people. At this moment, he just stood there quietly and looked at the 10 grade 4 pills in front of him. They were all of the best grade 4 pills in existence. Gradually, Lu Feng smiled. This was the most persistent smile, which was also considered the craziest smile. Every time this smile appeared, it meant that Lu Feng's mind was clear of distracting thoughts and he was going crazy for a goal. Finally, Lu Feng raised his arm slightly. At this moment, everyone's attention was drawn to him. Lu Feng's smile made everyone understand that this monster wouldn't give up. He had already decided everything. Next, it was time for him to blossom crazily. Lu Feng stretched out his arm and sucked the 10 elixir pills in front of him. He took a deep breath and didn't hesitate in the slightest. He had finally begun to unleash his terrifying spiritual energy. It was as if the entire sky was filled with Lu Feng's mind attribute. When they felt this terrifying, boundless, and unfathomable mind attribute, everyone's faces became distorted. The corners of their eyes twitched slightly. They were all powerhouses, but after feeling this, they actually couldn't say a complete sentence. Grandmaster Yintiga took a deep breath, her eyes filled with shock. How terrifying, what a huge amount of mental energy! It seems that the so-called 100-fold spiritual power is far from his limit. Now, the spiritual power that filled the air had at least reached a level of several thousand times. Moreover, the number is still increasing, and it's still rising without end. Normal geniuses only had a spiritual power that was 10 times more than normal. However, Lu Feng was already thousands of times stronger. Such a number made people feel terrified and hopeless. These people finally understood what it meant to be a true monstrous genius of an era, and even the main character of an era. With this kind of mind power, Lu Feng's existence was truly unsolvable. Others could release a psychic skill, but he could release it endlessly without restraint. He alone was equivalent to hundreds or even thousands of monsters. This is indeed the era of the War of the Kings. Even on the path of Psyche Masters, there were so many incomprehensible monsters. Killer King, Emperor, Heavenly King, Immortal King, and this Futu. 5 Supreme Monarchs. 5 Supreme Monarchs have already appeared. This War of the Kings is the real War of the Kings. Lu Feng did not seem to notice the discussions of many existences, because at this moment, he had forgotten everything. He was an emperor, and an emperor could not afford to fail. Therefore, he was staking everything on this one throw. He was going to step into the forbidden realm of alchemy recorded in the pill scripture. In an instant, the boundless mind power suddenly disappeared. Many existences were slightly startled. However, they soon discovered that the mind power had not disappeared. It had not disappeared at all. It had just gathered and condensed in the space around Lu Feng. One could imagine how terrifying the power of the mind power that filled the sky and earth would be when it was concentrated in a small area. These people knew that if it weren't for the fact that this mental strength belonged to Lu Feng, then in just an instant, in this space where the mental strength was terrifyingly rich, Even an upheaval stage martial artist would have been crushed to pieces. Standing in this world where the mind power seemed to be about to materialize, Lu Feng did not feel the slightest difference. This was his mind power, the primitive immortal power that belonged to him. This power could kill anything, but it had no effect on him at all. Finally, when this mind power was completely gathered in an extreme space, an ancient array formation faintly appeared in the void between the 10 elixir pills. It was an incomparably complex, modeled array, and filled with a desolate and ancient aura. What kind of array pattern is that? Everyone in the field of array formations began to ask questions. They could feel the desolate, ancient, and even forbidden aura that this array carried, but they had never seen such an array before. In fact, they had never even heard of it before. This made many existences feel incredulous. However, their shock was not over yet. It was far from over. The purpose of Lu Feng's appearance was to shock and confuse many existences. The immortal king had already taken a shocking step. Then he, Lu Feng, could not fall behind. Light flashed in his eyes, and endless terrifying mind power actually flourished once again. This terrifying majesty made many of the alchemists around Lu Feng retreat slightly. They all felt an unbelievable power begin to spread. There's actually a bottom line. What is this Futu trying to do? What is he trying to do? These people simply did not understand what Lu Feng was trying to do. Such terrifying mind power, the mysterious and ancient array pattern, and the 10 pills quietly floating in the air. There was definitely a connection between all of these, but no one could say or think of what the connection was. These people stared blankly at Lu Feng. They knew that Lu Feng would not use such a big scene just to show off his power. Finally, when the most powerful primitive immortal power was completely compressed in the surrounding space, Lu Feng moved. He reached out and gently waved his hand. In that instant, the 10 pills all gathered around Lu Feng, in front of Lu Feng, in the ancient array. The primitive immortal power began to vibrate violently, compressing to the limit. The 10 elixirs were no longer under Lu Feng's control, but they were still moving. These 10 elixirs were actually pulled by the ancient, desolate, and even forbidden spirit formation and started to converge towards the center of the spirit formation. At the sight of this, many people's eyes lit up with astonishment. So this is the function of these 10 pills. Many existences now understood why Lu Feng wanted to concoct such a pill. They knew that all of this was inextricably linked to the ancient array pattern. I vaguely remember this situation. Grandmaster Taika frowned slightly, looking at the pills in front of her. Hearing his words, the 10 masters all focused their attention on him. Among the 4 resident grandmasters of the Alchemist Guild, Grandmaster Taika wasn't the strongest. In fact, she ranked 3rd or 4th. Among the 13 grandmasters of alchemy, she was at the very bottom. However, many grandmasters respected Grandmaster Yintika very much. This was because he was the oldest of the 13 grandmasters. Moreover, Grandmaster Yintika was the most knowledgeable of them all. If there was anyone among them who knew what Lu Feng wanted to do, it would be Grandmaster Cherry Taika. Sensing the confusion and urgency of her companions, Grandmaster Taika slowly lowered her head and fell silent. This scene felt familiar to her. Of course, it was only because she remembered reading about it in the past, not because she'd seen it with her own eyes. She pondered, continuously pondered. The 10 alchemy grandmasters didn't say anything to disturb Grandmaster Yintika. They knew that if they did, it would only cause the opposite effect and disrupt Yintika's train of thought. Lu Feng looked at the 10 medicinal pills that had materialized and gathered together. When he saw that the 10 medicinal pills had finally completely merged with the ancient spirit formation, his eyes began to tremble violently. Somehow, he seemed to sense a strange power slowly descending in these endless eras. That power was indescribable. He couldn't even sense how it came to be or how it came to be. However, Lu Feng knew the use of that power. At this moment, he knew better than anyone else that the existence of that power was real. Everyone watched quietly, but no one could truly sense the existence of Lu Feng's power. They couldn't sense the existence of that mysterious power at all. Punishment. Then do as you wish. My goal has already been set, so in this world, nothing can stop my footsteps. As long as there is something in my eyes, nothing can make me take a step back, nothing can make me change. This mysterious power was filled with boundless killing intent, as if it could obliterate the heavens and destroy reincarnation. Without a doubt, this was the ultimate power that could shake everything. It was the ultimate punishment for those who broke the laws of heaven and earth. However, although it was so oppressive and terrifying, Lu Feng didn't really care. Since he'd set his goal, he would do everything in his power to achieve it. Moreover, Lu Feng also understood that although this power was shocking to an unfathomable degree, if it really descended, it would definitely not be as extreme as what he felt. After all, his existence was still too weak, equivalent to an ant. Moreover, the taboo he was about to shatter was extremely small and couldn't be counted as anything. Therefore, although Lu Feng knew there was danger, he had the most resolute heart and the craziest determination. He didn't care at all. The boundless primitive immortal energy almost materialized and began to completely suppress the 10 elixirs, allowing them to completely fuse into the ancient array. At this moment, those elixirs actually started to disintegrate completely under the influence of this ancient taboo array. Seeing this scene, everyone had a completely different expression. Many people didn't understand. They didn't understand why Lu Feng would destroy the 10 peak grade 4 pills in the formation when they didn't have any use for them. These people didn't understand. Most people were confused. However, there were exceptions, such as Milky. Shock. This was a kind of shock. An indescribable feeling of shock. Milky looked at the ancient formation and the pills that were gradually changing. She finally remembered. This human Futu, where did he come from? Is he a pill master or not? Milky was shocked, her face contorted. She looked at Lu Feng and couldn't help but blurt it out. This was a grandmaster, a celestial master. She was as terrifying as the virtual king. Yet, she had such an expression on her face. This scene was even more shocking than Lu Feng's strange actions. It was hard to describe the turmoil in her heart. What is going on? Taradas frowned slightly. He'd never seen Milky like this before. It was so twisted that it shocked him. Grandmaster Milky didn't speak. She continued to look at Lu Feng with a twisted expression. She didn't move at all. After a long time, when the pills were about to disappear completely, she finally nodded with great difficulty. That's right. He's really going to do this. Chapter 4:11. Upon hearing Grandmaster Yingtika's words, the 10 great Pill Dao Grandmasters all gathered around her. They glanced at each other when they saw Cherry Teja's ugly expression. They didn't say anything, waiting for her to explain herself. Cherry Teja took a deep breath. She had understood everything. She watched Lu Feng go crazy and said slowly, "Don't worry, Lu Feng. He really is a madman. An incomparably terrifying madman. I never thought there would be such an existence among the wise and far-sighted psyche masters, among the calm and collected pill masters. He's a freak who's crazy to such an extent. He can forget and abandon everything for his ultimate goal. How can such a freak become a pill master?" The 10 grandmasters were at a loss at Yingteja's words. They looked at Lu Feng, but didn't sense Yingteja's so-called craziness. Of course, Cherry Teja could sense the expressions on their faces. At this moment, he had already calmed down completely. He smiled faintly, but this smile was mixed with too much bitterness and helplessness. He really is a madman who makes people tremble in fear. Do you know what he's doing right now? The 10 alchemy grandmasters gently shook their heads. If they knew, they wouldn't be asking questions. Yingtaja sighed again. She said slowly and solemnly, "He's refining pills." Slightly frowning, Taradas looked at Yintaga and said, "We can guess that Futu is not willing to lose. He must be preparing some crazy backup plan. But if you're talking about refining pills, it seems." Taradas could no longer understand why the 10 pills were gradually disappearing and turning back into a brand new, primitive essence. Yingtaja nodded. "It's only natural that you don't understand. I don't understand this either. I've only seen records of it. In the ancient records passed down from my alchemist alliance, I once saw records of such a scene. This is indeed concocting medicinal pills." The 10 grandmasters didn't ask any more questions. When they saw Yingtaja's expression, they vaguely understood something. They knew that what Lu Feng was doing right now was something that would shake the entire Tao of Alchemy division. That record was of a Saint Tao pill master. You might know his identity. He's called a Domain Saint Pill Master. Although they didn't say anything, the eyes of the 10 alchemy grandmasters protruded slightly. They looked at Yingtaja with shock. A Domain Saint Pill Master. How could they not know this? They weren't the only ones. Any Pill Tao Grandmaster would have heard of this name. In the Tao of Alchemy division, this name was a legend, a legend. He was crowned as the Saint Tao Pill Master closest to a divine Pill Master in this era. It could be said that in this era of technological civilization, a region's sacred alchemy master was equivalent to a human king. He was a legend, a legendary existence that the entire Tao of Alchemy division had to revere. If this matter was related to him, then it would definitely be something that would shock the entire Pill Tao division. Actually, you only know of the Domain Saint Pill Master's great status in the Pill Tao division, but you've overlooked his other terrifying achievements. In the eyes of a Domain Saint Pill Master, his greatest achievement wasn't becoming the #1 Saint Tao Pill Master. Nor was he the greatest legend in this era. His proudest achievement was that he was the only one in this era to have comprehended 3 parts of the Pill Sutra. Many people looked at her strangely when they heard this. They all knew about the alchemy mantra, and they all tried to comprehend it. Unfortunately, none of them were recognized by the soul of the alchemy mantra. Therefore, they hadn't comprehended the Pill Sutra. Since ancient times, those who could comprehend the Pill Sutra were as rare as phoenix feathers and Qilin horns. Because of this, the Grandmasters had unnaturally forgotten about the Pill Sutra. But now that Cherry Taiga mentioned it, they suddenly realized something. 9 out of the 10 Grandmasters fell silent. They were pondering the connection between what Yingtaja had said. The only exception was Wangui. Wangui knew about this. He knew that Lu Feng had already comprehended a part of the Pill Sutra. Since Yingtaja had connected everything to the Pill Sutra, he seemed to have a faint understanding of what was going on. Wangui took a deep breath and looked at Yingtaja. "Grandmaster Yingtaja, do you mean that what Futu is doing is related to the Pill Sutra?" Everyone looked up at Wangui at the same time. Yingtaja was no exception. She looked at Wangui and slowly asked, "Grandmaster Wangui, you brought Futu here. He is a monster of the human race. Can you tell me if this Futu has comprehended the Pill Sutra?" Even an ordinary person would become extraordinary if they could comprehend the Pill Sutra. Since ancient times, those who had comprehended the Pill Sutra had all reached the Grandmaster realm or above without exception. It could be said that anyone who comprehended the Pill Sutra would become a Grandmaster. However, the aptitude that Lu Feng displayed was already enough to shock everyone. If he were to comprehend the alchemy mantra, then the commotion it would cause would be unimaginable. Wangui smiled faintly. Seeing his smile, everyone understood what was going on. The 10 Grandmasters took a deep breath and looked at Lu Feng in a different light. He is really a monster. Even Su Ling didn't know that Lu Feng had comprehended the alchemy scripture. Now that he knew about it, he was deeply moved. However, his emotions were mostly filled with smiles. In his opinion, the stronger Lu Feng was, the more beneficial it would be for the human race. Ingtaja nodded gently when she heard Su Ling's words. He's not just a monster, he's a crazy monster. This kind of existence is incomprehensible. Ingtaja turned to the 10 grandmasters and said slowly, since Fudu has really comprehended the Pill Sutra, everything makes sense. The realm's sacred alchemy master mentioned it in his note. Some of the more powerful and important parts of the Pill Sutra contain a taboo record. This taboo record is a kind of alchemy method that can touch upon the true taboo. I believe that Futu is using this taboo technique. It was a forbidden technique. The 10 grandmasters were all shocked. Although they had never heard of this taboo technique, they knew from its name that it was an incomparably heaven-defying existence. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been listed as a taboo in the Pill Sutra. If he really succeeds, then this Futu has surpassed a realm's sacred alchemy master in a certain aspect. After all, even a realm's sacred alchemy master couldn't last until the very end. Finally, the primitive immortal force completely merged the formation with the 10 pills. Gradually, the pills disappeared. They were completely gone, no longer glowing with their previous radiance. The 10 pills turned into 10 brand new balls of divine item essence, quietly floating in the air. Below them, the ancient taboo formation finally began to operate thoroughly after Lu Feng infused it with his primitive immortal force. Countless rays of light shone from the formation. If it were just rays of light, none of the people present would be afraid. However, under the illumination of this light, everyone's expression changed drastically. Vaguely, all of them actually retreated by a lot. The 11 alchemy grandmasters looked at each other and saw the unconcealable fear in each other's eyes. In the end, they also chose to retreat a little. The immortal king still stood in place. The taboo aura made him uncomfortable. However, he didn't move an inch from the beginning. Because the immortal king was a heaven-defying existence. He had transmigrated, and he was invincible. However, this couldn't make him retreat at all. Moreover, Lu Feng, who was in the deepest part of this endless danger, in the area with the densest taboo aura, didn't retreat at all? Lu Feng didn't retreat. How could he retreat at all? Taboo, this is the taboo aura. An emperor, as expected of an emperor. In any domain, you must be the supreme existence. If we didn't appear in this era, perhaps you would really be the only ruler of this era. The immortal king had sensed the taboo aura before. He knew that Lu Feng had only reversed the situation slightly, so the taboo aura wasn't that strong. If Lu Feng really wanted to do something heaven-defying, then this taboo aura would be able to wipe out all existence in an instant. If you can really condense your primitive immortal force to the realm of great success, then perhaps you won't be so afraid of this taboo aura. Lu Feng was refining pills with his strongest power fully released. Everyone knew and could see it. However, Lu Feng's method of refining pills left them confused and shocked. Is there such a method of refining pills? Could it be that this is some lost method of refining pills? Why haven't I heard of it before? Chapter 412. Discussions rang out one after another. They looked at Lu Feng with shock and bewilderment, incomparable bewilderment. Lu Feng's refinement had overturned their knowledge of Pill Dao. These people never thought that there would be such a method of concocting pills, such an unimaginable method of concocting pills. Using pills as materials, using pills to concoct pills. Borrowing the power of the taboo to transform the pills, condense the taboo aura, and evolve. This is a taboo pill art, the most terrifying taboo pill art recorded in the Pill Sutra. Her eyes were filled with excitement and shock. She felt a sense of excitement she'd never felt before. This kind of pill art couldn't even be considered a legend, because there were too few people who knew about it. However, this taboo pill art had always existed. Now that she saw this forbidden pill refining method, she was 10 times or even 100 times more shocked than when she saw an immortal king refine a 5th-tier pill. They're all grade 4 divine items, and they can never be refined into grade 5 pills. This is the law of the pill Tao world, and also the law of the universe. Fotu wants to use the taboo formation and taboo method to forcefully change their existence. He wants the pills to completely transform, break through the universe's taboo, and complete a shocking transformation to become a true grade 5 pill. But doing this has already touched upon the universe's taboo shackles. Is he courting death? The universe's taboo shackles were forbidden areas of the universe's laws. No one was allowed to set foot in them. Taboo meant that they couldn't be touched. It was the foundation of the universe, the foundation that suppressed everything. Once the taboo was touched, it meant that the universe's origin was touched. The result would be complete suppression by the universe's origin. Don't worry too much. Fotu can't be considered to have touched upon the taboo completely. After all, he's only using the taboo formation's power to fuse the 10 pills and trigger an internal transformation, turning them into grade 5 pills. This won't cause the universe's taboo to punish him. However, if you want to succeed, it's really too difficult. Back then, the realm's sacred pill master wanted to use this method to refine a true grade 9 divine pill. Unfortunately, he couldn't bear the taboo's punishment. In the end, he failed completely. The price of failure was severe injuries. As for the 10 pills, all of them were lost. However, those heavy injuries were only on the physical body. Therefore, Fu too should at most be suffering from endless pain and torment. Perhaps his life won't be in any danger, Yingtega said slowly, but there was a puzzled look on her face. She'd learned all of this from the information left behind by the realm's sacred pill master. Since ancient times, only realm's sacred pill masters had ever used the taboo method. No one else had ever come into contact with it, or even know about it. Fotu, was there really no danger? Not even Grandmaster Yintego was aware of this. The realm's sacred pill master failed. Will he be able to succeed? You should know that his talent is the most terrifying existence in this epic. Lu Feng's eyes were bloodshot and filled with a horrifying bloodthirst. He'd never imagined that the taboo's power would be so terrifying. It was so terrifying that he felt like his entire body was about to be annihilated. A powerful aura slowly emerged. Many people could feel the taboo in the depths of their souls. They exchanged glances with each other, their eyes filled with endless shock. They couldn't understand why such a taboo aura would appear in a competition between young alchemists. What a terrifying aura! This aura is definitely a taboo aura. What was this human Fu Tu doing? He's only refining pills, yet he's triggered the taboo. Could it be that he's not refining pills, but doing something that violates the laws of the universe? Many existences were above martialists. They had already understood some of the laws of the universe. They knew that something that violated the laws of the universe had to exist to trigger the taboo aura. Although the taboo aura around Lu Feng wasn't very strong, it was still there. This proved that what Lu Feng was doing was really going against the laws of the universe. Forcefully changing the laws of the universe and refining a 4th-grade divine item into a 5th-grade divine item is undoubtedly a challenge to the original laws of the universe. Back then, the realm's sacred pill master was at the peak of 8th-grade sacred path alchemist. He was only one step away from becoming a divine path alchemist. However, even though he had such exceptional talent and comprehended 3 parts of the pill scripture, he still failed. The reason was that he couldn't bear the pain brought about by the taboo aura. Many existences fell silent when they heard Yingtejia's words. A domain saint alchemist was in existence in the alchemy world that was equivalent to a sovereign personage in this era. However, he had failed in the end. Even such a great existence with such a strong will couldn't bear the torture of the terrifying forbidden aura. These alchemy grandmasters were really puzzled. What alchemist in this world could bear it? Whether or not he can succeed will depend on him. This pain will make him lose his rationality and all his thoughts. Although the realm's sacred pill master said that he wouldn't be in danger as long as he stopped, we don't know the real situation. After all, the realm's sacred pill master was already at the level of a quasi-celestial emperor. His strength allowed him to survive the backlash of the true taboo aura of the universe. Futu, on the other hand, is still just an alchemist. Therefore, if there's really no other way, we have to step in. We can't let such a monstrous alchemist die in front of us. The 10 grandmasters nodded their heads gently. Their gazes were solemn. Many existences were watching Lu Feng expectantly. After triggering the power of the taboo aura, Lu Feng had once again experienced the trembling of his soul and the terrifying torture in the depths of his soul. However, he didn't feel the slightest bit of difference. This kind of pain and torment might be enough to make any existence collapse. However, Lu Feng wasn't one of them. Back then, I was only a mid-level warrior, yet I was already able to fight a martialist. The strongest activation of my bloodline and the torment of life and death weren't inferior to anything else. I experienced 9 lifetimes of life and death, the torment of my soul and the destruction of my fate, but I still managed to walk out of it. Why would I be afraid of this? The massacre abyss and the test of death were tests of life. At the final moment, I experienced the pain of life and death. After billions of cycles of life and death, billions of cycles of life and death, billions of cycles of life and soul destruction, I still managed to return. Now, what can this level of pain do? Endless pain was enough to make anyone sink into oblivion. However, in the face of this, Lu Feng was still clear-headed. His eyes were even crazier and more persistent than before. The taboo aura had already affected everything in the surroundings. Just sensing it made many martialists, who had experienced countless life and death situations, tremble in fear. As they watched Lu Feng, who was shrouded by the boundless taboo, admiration appeared on their faces for the first time. Shocking innate talent is still just innate talent in the end. If one doesn't have the most resolute will and the craziest persistence, then they will just be a monstrous genius with nothing but talent. However, this Futu actually has such a crazy and terrifyingly resolute willpower. It's hard to imagine what he has experienced. It's hard to imagine what his final destination will be in the future. Lulu grabbed Jiahua Wuyue's arm tightly. The anxiety in her heart was written all over her face. When he saw this, Jiahua Wuyue just smiled faintly. If one were to ask who understood Lu Feng the most in the world, perhaps Jiahua Wuyue wouldn't be considered much. However, he was one of the people who truly understood Lu Feng. Jiahua Wuyue was someone who had truly seen Lu Feng's fate. He knew how terrifying Lu Feng was. His confidence in Lu Feng had never weakened in the slightest. The appearance of an immortal king shook the world. There were 6 supreme powers, and there was even the most extreme existence of immortal power. It could be said that after today, an immortal king would become the #1 person in the current battle of the kings. Even so, in Jiahua Wuyue's heart, an immortal king was still not a match for an emperor. He was definitely not a match for Lu Feng. Since the beginning of time, the greatest birth horoscope represents the greatest existence. No one can describe the future of a sacred master. In the end, everyone is a subject. The emperor's orders cannot be disobeyed. They will eventually fall on the emperor's supreme path. And now this is just a small pain. To an emperor, it's nothing. It's nothing at all. Hearing Jiahua Wuyue's words, Lulu's little head nodded fiercely. However, The anxiety and worry in her eyes were still there. Jiahua Wuyue patted Lulu's head gently. He continued, Lulu, when the sacred master fought a heavenly king for you, the pain he suffered was definitely greater than what he suffered now. Under such circumstances, he still walked out of the abyss and played the strongest note. Now, facing this forbidden power, he won't have any problems. Jiahua Wuyue had absolute confidence in Lu Feng. He firmly believed that Lu Feng would never reach this point. As Lu Xiaoran listened to the conversation between the two of them, faint ripples appeared in his silent eyes. For the first time, he felt a sense of admiration for Lu Feng. The essence of the 10 elixirs was gradually disappearing. They were all attracted by the ancient forbidden array and gathered together. Faintly, they became something new. Many existences felt a strange aura from this newly formed essence. This aura was completely different from the aura of the previous Grade 4 elixirs. Finally, a god-level warrior discovered what was going on. His eyes were filled with disbelief. What is this? What is he trying to do? This aura, it's the aura of a Grade 5 elixir. But just now, he used Grade 4 elixirs refined from Grade 4 divine items. What is going on? Hearing this hidden deity's words, many existences were jolted awake. They took a deep breath and looked at Lu Feng with a completely different expression. Finally, a psychic master came to a realization. His eyes flickered with extreme shock. I understand. I understand now. I finally understand why this taboo aura appeared. This god-tier existence no longer tried to hide his existence. He was so shocked by Lu Feng's performance that he had forgotten everything. Chapter 413. Grade 4. No matter how good those elixirs are, they are still only Grade 4 elixirs. The essence of their structure has already determined everything. However, at this moment the aura of a Grade 5 elixir can be felt. This can only prove one thing. Futu used a forbidden power to change this elixir into a Grade 5 existence. The grade of a divine object is determined by the universe. By doing this, he is undoubtedly changing the essence of a Grade 4 divine object. He is defying the heavens. This was really defying the heavens. It was incomparably defying the heavens. And upon hearing this voice, many existences were startled awake. They stared at Lu Feng with boundless fear in their eyes. The Divine Master's words had been very clear. Lu Feng was changing the divine object and forcibly turning a Grade 4 elixir into a Grade 5 elixir. This was completely going against the will of the universe's origin. Therefore, the universe's origin had sent down a forbidden aura to punish him. The surrounding people exclaimed and were shocked. Lu Feng did not change in the slightest. At this moment, he had already entered a state of madness. At this moment, the forbidden aura became stronger as the elixir continued to evolve. When the Grade 5 aura formed in the ancient forbidden array, the forbidden aura reached a terrifying level. Lu Feng felt that his physical body no longer belonged to him. It was very difficult to control it. This was the punishment of the forbidden aura on his physical body. However, Lu Feng did not care much about this, as he had used his own mind power to refine the elixir. If his physical body wanted to sink, then so be it. As long as the spiritual flame was still burning, then everything would continue. The Grade 5 aura became more and more obvious. Similarly, the forbidden aura in the space where Lu Feng was located became more and more obvious. Everyone could clearly see the cracks that were faintly appearing around Lu Feng's body. An endless amount of bright red blood appeared from these cracks. The situation was extremely strange and frightening. Finally, under the shroud of the endless forbidden aura, the elixir that had faintly become one in the ancient array became smaller and smaller. What a terrifying will! I'm afraid this is the first time such a scene has appeared in this era. Wait, we still need to wait. This is the period when the medicinal pills are completely formed. As long as we wait for these medicinal pills to completely fuse, then it will be the embryonic form of a 5th-grade medicinal pill." Hearing Yingtage's words, the 10 alchemy grandmasters were all excited. They had just heard from Yingtage that the Realm Saint Pill Master had also reached this step. He had even fused all the pills into one. However, the Realm Saint Pill Master had given up due to the strongest taboo back then. These people were all anticipating that Lu Feng would be able to break the miracle of a Domain Saint Alchemy Master, allowing this true miracle to be completely born at this moment. "You are worthy of your title. Looks like it's really difficult to reach the peak of this era and defeat you." The immortal king sighed slightly, but his eyes were filled with an endless fighting spirit. He sighed, but he was incomparably excited. Because only this kind of Lu Feng could allow him to fight to his heart's content. Only this kind of person would give him a chance to truly break through the shackles. "Good luck. I also look forward to your success." If Lu Feng succeeded, then it would still be a draw. A draw in the last round would also mean that he had failed. However, the immortal king really hoped that Lu Feng would succeed. At some point, Lu Feng's robes had turned completely red. Many existences were incomparably terrified, because they could already see Lu Feng's body on the verge of shattering. These people had never seen such a scene before. It was simply too shocking and indescribable. Is he really going to go this far? A peak-perfect stage cultivator muttered to himself. He was filled with endless confusion as he watched Lu Feng's madness. He really didn't know whether it was worth it or not. After all, this was just an insignificant competition. Although the winner's reward was incomparably rich, everyone understood that existences like Lu Feng and the Immortal King were definitely not cultivated by ordinary forces. Moreover, even if they didn't have any terrifying forces behind them, after showing such shocking potential at this moment, as long as they were willing, any peak race in the universe would be able to take out countless resources. Therefore, these two people shouldn't care so much about the so-called reward. As for Lu Feng, he shouldn't be so crazy that he even wanted to give up everything he had. Is this really necessary? Beside him, a peak-perfect stage cultivator sighed deeply. He looked at Lu Feng's terrifying and miserable state, but his eyes were filled with admiration. For us, it's not worth it, far from it. But for the Futu of the human race, it's worth it. He is an evildoer of this era. He is one of the 5 supreme kings that appeared in the Battle of the Kings. Such an existence would never allow himself to be defeated. Now, especially when his opponent is also a king, he can't tolerate even the slightest bit of failure. Although the peak-perfect stage cultivator who spoke was not an evildoer, he was still a genius. He was considered a peak genius in his field. Therefore, he could understand Lu Feng's crazy obsession with victory. He also knew that only such an obsession could truly defeat everything and reach the peak. His companion next to him seemed to understand, but he still nodded gently. Seeing this scene, the peak-perfect stage cultivator sighed softly. He knew that ordinary people wouldn't understand these things unless they were also evildoers. His body was no longer listening to his command. However, Lu Feng was still smiling. He had already seen that the 10 elixirs had now been condensed into the size of 2. Lu Feng knew that he was about to complete it. He was very, very close to completing the final prototype of the elixir. At this moment, Lu Feng's will was once again ignited. Monstrous waves had already appeared in Xin Yuan's Sea of Consciousness. It seemed as though they were going to swallow the entire Sea of Consciousness. This was the first time in history that Lu Feng had mobilized everything in Xin Yuan's Sea of Consciousness in such a terrifying manner. In the past, he had only used the primitive immortal power to increase his combat strength. He hadn't used much of it at all. Even when he had used supreme immortal techniques, he had only used a portion of it. However, this time, in order to succeed, He had forgotten everything and used everything in his craziest way possible. Fuse with me. The final moment had finally appeared. Lu Feng's craziness was vividly displayed at this moment. Although he had already become a blood-red figure and his limbs were about to be separated, Lu Feng still let out a final roar. In an instant, the strongest forbidden aura descended. At this moment, Lu Feng's body seemed to be pulled by countless giant hands that were about to tear him apart completely. Many existences looked at the prototype of the elixir and the figure in the sky that was already completely distorted. Indescribable shock and awe flashed in the depths of their hearts. In a place far away from the forbidden aura, just feeling the fluctuations of the forbidden aura caused their souls to tremble in pain. Then, what about Lu Feng, who was in the center of the forbidden aura and was being pulled and distorted by the power of the forbidden aura? These people were really unimaginable. It was really unimaginable. As they looked at the prototype of the Grade 5 elixir, the 11 alchemy grandmasters could no longer remain calm. They finally all gathered outside the forbidden aura. In the eyes of these alchemy grandmasters, Grade 5 elixirs were like trash. As long as they wanted to, they could even refine Grade 7 elixirs. However, at this moment, when they saw the prototype of the Grade 5 elixir, they found it hard to suppress the excitement in their hearts. He really succeeded. This is the realm that the region's sacred alchemy masters had reached back in the day. He really succeeded. Next, it will be the final moment. If he succeeds, then he will really create a miracle. Among the 11 alchemy grandmasters, Ying Tijiao was the most excited. Others had only heard about it from her own mouth, but she had seen it all with her own eyes. Succeed. You must succeed. If Lu Feng succeeded this time, then there would be hope for him to succeed when he became a sacred alchemy master in the future. If he succeeded, then Lu Feng would be able to refine the only true Grade 9 divine elixir that existed outside of the immortal demon era and the era of alchemy artifacts. At this moment, there were at least 300 million cultivators gathered here, all of whom were above the level of martial artists. Everyone here was a martialist. Besides them, no one else was doing anything else in every corner of Medicine Divine City. They were all quietly or crazily watching the center of all this glory and glory, Lu Feng. Their eyes could no longer see anything. There was no doubt that Lu Feng's physical body had lost all its power. His physical body had already been annihilated to an extreme extent by this forbidden power. If it hadn't been for his human monarch bloodline, he would have already been reduced to nothingness. However, this wasn't the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was the danger and pain that no one knew or understood. This was the torment of one's soul. After Lu Feng had refined the prototype of the Grade 5 divine elixir, the forbidden aura was no longer limited to the decay of one's physical body. It had already begun to corrode Lu Feng's soul and Lu Feng's heart. His soul was still frantically refining and sketching those frightening runes. He knew that if he stopped now, this incomparably painful torment would disappear. However, could he stop? No. Absolutely not. Lu Feng's heart was screaming. He couldn't stop, as he was already very close to success. How could he give up now? His physical body was completely sluggish and turned into a sea of blood. However, many of them knew that Lu Feng was still going on. He was still going crazy. They watched the condensed power in the void and watched as the elixir pill continued to evolve. These people knew that, even though Lu Feng's physical body had been suppressed, he still hadn't given up. He was still using his willpower and soul to complete the final step of the process. This willpower is world-shocking. Is this the terror of an epic monster? An epic monster. He is the theme of an epic, the eternal symbol of an epic. His innate talent is heaven-defying, and he has an even more terrifying willpower. It is hard to imagine how far he will go in the future. Chapter 4:14. Many gods no longer hid their existence. In the face of such a scene, there was no way they could hide it anymore. Because to them, hiding everything was disrespectful and disrespectful. In the Sea of Souls, above Shun Yuan's Sea of Consciousness, Lu Feng's spiritual body sat quietly in the endless sea of madness. Boundless primitive, immortal energy rumbled, but strangely stopped when it reached Lu Feng's side. His soul was here, controlling everything, continuing everything that had not been completed. Suddenly, the forbidden aura flooded in. At this moment, Shun Yuan's Sea of Consciousness produced an incomparably terrifying fluctuation. This was completely different from when Lu Feng used it to the limit. The degree of surging was completely different. At this moment, the surging waves were filled with a destructive aura. Back then, the King of Chaos had once entered this place, but he had been ambushed like never before. In fact, he had even felt a rare sense of fear. One must know that the King of Chaos was a martial Tao incarnation. He was an existence that was always in the Divine King's forbidden mythological domain. But even so, he was still shocked by Lu Feng's Sea of Consciousness. One could imagine how terrifying this place was. Feeling the invasion of the forbidden power, Lu Feng's spiritual body's tightly shut eyes suddenly opened. A mocking smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The Divine King's forbidden mythological domain. Once they enter that domain, their power is the forbidden power. Although I can't suppress the Divine King here, I can still suppress these powers. Gently waving his arm, the next moment, endless primitive immortal power surged and turned into a heaven-killing giant blade. It instantly slashed at the invading forbidden power. In an instant, it was really just an instant. The forbidden power was completely annihilated just like that. There was no trace of it. Extreme and terrifying. But it didn't end like that. Forbidden powers were forbidden because their existence couldn't be tolerated by the world. After killing one, there was a second, a third, and countless more. His arm kept waving. Shun Yuan's Sea of Consciousness was surging crazily. Countless powers were controlled by him, forming all sorts of strange forms. The weapon of the King Tao, the blade that slaughters the heavens, the beast that destroys the world, the demon that kills the heavens. All sorts of strange phenomena were born as they charged madly at the seemingly endless taboo energy. Shun Yuan's Sea of Consciousness, which had once been calm, had now become a battlefield. A true battlefield of endless slaughter. Lu Feng looked at everything before him, and the look in his eyes gradually changed. An inexplicable profoundness was born in his eyes, as if he could control space-time and fate. His eyes shone brightly, causing Shun Yuan's Sea of Consciousness to go crazy once again. The taboo power started to be destroyed infinitely. However, an even more boundless power started to invade this place once again. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng did not show the slightest trace of fear. He knew that although he had a frightening amount of primitive immortal power in Shun Yuan's Sea of Consciousness, it was still far too little compared to the forbidden power. After all, this taboo power was produced with a universe as its backing. Taking a deep breath, Lu Feng waved his arm once again. A perfect arc hung at the corner of his mouth. He had already felt it. Amid this endless collision, as his primitive immortal power collided with the universe's taboo power, the refinement of the elixir pill had entered its final phase. Lu Feng knew that as long as the elixir pill was completely refined, this newly formed Grade 5 elixir pill would be a true Grade 5 elixir pill. This would be a Grade 5 elixir pill recognized by the universe. At that time, the so-called taboo punishment would also disappear. Everything would return to its original state. It could be said that as long as he could persevere until the end, everything would be fine. Lu Feng smiled as he looked at the boundless taboo power before him. Perhaps, when he had faced such a huge amount of taboo power in the outside world, he had only been able to passively endure it and tremble helplessly. However, right now, in this world that belonged to him, Lu Feng's strength was incomparable. Here, he was a god. The primitive immortal power was his believers, a part of his body. The primitive immortal power was the true supreme immortal power. It was the combined power of chaos immortal power, determination immortal power, and creation immortal power. It was incomparably terrifying and was the strongest in history. Although no one knew if there was anyone who could compare to it, it was already the most terrifying existence in history. With such soldiers, what would Lu Feng be afraid of? What could he be afraid of? In my world, I am the greatest existence. Perhaps the current nothingness might not be able to contend with you with the universe as its backing, but in just a short period of time, I can easily resist you. Therefore, the outcome is already decided. With a confident smile on his face, Lu Feng's arm finally fell again. Almost there, almost there. Really, it's just a little bit more. Taradas said excitedly as he looked at the embryonic Grade 5 elixir pill in front of Lu Feng. The 10 alchemy grandmasters beside him had the same expression on their faces. Yuan Ling and Yu Huayan were also included in this list. Perhaps because of their race's standpoint, they didn't like Lu Feng. In fact, they were very fed up with him. However, they had already forgotten about all this. Lu Feng's existence was no longer something to be jealous of. Regardless of whether Lu Feng could really succeed this time, they had all failed. They had all been slapped in the face by Wangui. Therefore, they no longer thought about these things. Right now, they were no longer alchemy grandmasters of any race. They were just alchemy masters, a group of the purest alchemy masters. As the president of the Alchemy Guild, they were all pure alchemy masters. They were also looking forward to the appearance of a miracle. They also hoped that the path of alchemy could really give birth to a world-shaking genius. They hoped that alchemy masters could become the true main characters of an era. And now it was the best opportunity to do so. Therefore, they were crazy, excited, and trembling. They, too, were filled with boundless hope. What a terrifying willpower! He can actually remain calm and resist to such an extent in the midst of this endless taboo. Futu, he has really surpassed a Regent Saint Alchemy Master. Regardless of whether he can succeed this time, he has already done enough. What he has done has already truly shocked the world. The current Lu Feng already possessed a feat that shocked even these alchemy grandmasters, and was enough to make them revere him. Regardless of whether Lu Feng could really succeed or not, he had already proven himself and made all the alchemy grandmasters, alchemy masters, and even all the alchemy masters who were watching this scene acknowledge his existence. Under the gazes of hundreds of millions of people, the embryonic form of the Grade 5 elixir pill became clearer and more obvious. The aura of the Grade 5 elixir pill was about to become complete. There had never been an elixir pill like this, which had been watched and anticipated by countless existences. However, it really had the qualifications to do so. This Grade 5 elixir pill would be the only one in this era that was refined from a Grade 4 divine object. Time passed slowly. Finally, the final aura appeared. Feeling this fluctuation, the 11 alchemy grandmasters were momentarily stunned and at a loss. They were all eagerly anticipating the appearance of this final moment. However, when this moment really appeared, they were at a loss. Really, he succeeded? Really, he succeeded? Really, he succeeded. Between heaven and earth, there was an endless silence. It was a kind of complete peace. However, this situation did not last long because in the next moment, endless sound waves overturned heaven and earth, causing the entire space to become noisy. All of them had witnessed the birth of a miracle. They might not be alchemy masters, or they might not even have the slightest contact with alchemy masters. However, this time, these people no longer cared about this. To them, being able to witness the birth of a miracle was a kind of glory. No matter what this miracle was, as long as they could see it, it was the most fortunate and exciting thing. A gentle step seemed to be able to cross the river of time and space. At this moment, the 11 alchemy grandmasters all used their supreme mystiques. Although there was only a short distance between them and Lu Feng, due to their incomparable excitement, they actually forgot everything and directly used their great mystiques to reach Lu Feng's side. However, these people did not look at the elixir pill. No matter how good the elixir pill was, it was still an inanimate object. If they lost Lu Feng, then this elixir pill, it would only have a little symbolic meaning. Therefore, in their eyes, there was only Lu Feng, only Lu Feng. The moment the elixir pill was formed, the forbidden aura had completely disappeared. However, these people did not move. They quietly watched Lu Feng as if waiting for something. After a long time, the annihilated body slowly began to recover. When they saw this scene, the 11 alchemy grandmasters sighed softly. The rumors are indeed true. According to the legends, as long as one survives the annihilation and the punishment of the forbidden power, everything will return to its original state. Looking at Futu's current state, it seems to confirm that saying. Many people nodded their heads gently. The forbidden power was just a kind of negative power. Although it was the most terrifying power in the universe, this forbidden power also contained a trace of vitality. It was this vitality that made all these people rush to the end without regard for anything else. Waiting. Everyone was waiting. At this moment, the most eternal figure in the sky was the body lying quietly on the ground, its life aura growing stronger and stronger. Everyone was panting slightly. To them, this trip was really worth it. There had never been a grand alchemist competition that could compare to this one. The alchemy competition they saw was more like an earth-shattering showdown between two supreme kings. It was a showdown between eternity and destiny. Such a grand competition could be said to be magnificent, causing people to gasp in admiration. Although the immortal king was world-shocking and possessed a total of 6 supreme powers, he even had the most supreme power, such as immortal power, and he had become the first person in history to refine a grade 5 elixir pill. However, at this moment, his brilliance was no longer there, because in front of Lu Feng, everything else had become a foil. There was no longer any brilliance. However, the immortal king did not feel anything strange about this. Anyone who could become a supreme king was not the kind of person who would be jealous. In their hearts, the stronger the opponent, the better. They were not afraid of the opponent being too strong, but they were afraid of the opponent being too weak. This would cause them to lose the joy of battle. Slowly, Lu Feng's body finally began to recover, and the fluctuations of vitality appeared again. Everything seemed to be returning to its original state. Chapter 4:15. Countless streams of blood flowed back into Lu Feng's battered body from the void. The wounds from before were gradually recovering, and all the cracks were gradually disappearing. The fragmented feeling of the past had become a thing of the past. His face was extremely pale. After a long time, his face was once again filled with the aura of life. Many existences were astonished when they saw this scene. They had naturally heard of the legend of the taboo power. They also knew that after experiencing the taboo tribulation, everything would return to its previous state. However, this was the first time they had seen such an incredible recovery. This is simply like going back in time. It was as if time had flowed back and everything had returned to its previous state. After a long while, Lu Feng's tightly shut eyes finally slowly opened. Lu Feng quietly looked at everyone in front of him. Gradually, he finally revealed a trace of a smile. Everything was under Lu Feng's control. Although his physical body had been completely destroyed by the taboo power, Lu Feng's soul still existed. In such a short time, the taboo power of this level was simply unable to harm Lu Feng in the slightest in his spiritual sea divine plane. Lu Feng had only done one thing against all the taboo power that had invaded his spiritual sea divine plane, and that was to suppress it. Crazy, incomparably crazy, and completely suppressed it. Although he had the backing of the entire universe and the taboo power of the universe, the taboo power that had appeared could not be considered a true taboo power. After all, Lu Feng had only violated some insignificant rules. In addition, this battlefield was in Lu Feng's spiritual sea divine plane. In the end, Lu Feng had easily suppressed everything. A moment later, he stood up completely. Lu Feng stretched slightly and sensed the state of his body. After a moment of sluggishness, he suddenly smiled. It was a smile that seemed inexplicable to others. However, in Lu Feng's opinion, it was a smile of incomparable excitement. To think that I'm actually stuck in the shackles of the critical point, it won't be long. I only need one more king-level battle, or even an intense battle comparable to a king-level battle. Then, I will be able to completely shatter my shackles and enter the third realm. The third stage was the third stage of the Great Devil True Body, the purple-gold Great Devil Realm. Lu Feng knew that the great demonic power was the terrifying power produced by the great demonic true body. Perhaps he might not be as powerful as the primitive immortal force, but compared to ordinary pinnacle supreme powers, he was much, much more terrifying. Perhaps after reaching the great success stage, the power of the great devil would be comparable to the power of the chaos, laws, and creation immortal powers. Wait until I condense the purple-gold power of the great devil, then perhaps my power will rise again and enter a whole new level. Although it was just a guess, Lu Feng believed it. The power of the great devil in the past was not a supreme power at all. Just like the primitive immortal power, he was a power that was definitely below the supreme power. If that was not the case, he would not have been just a genius in the beginning, or even a monster. However, with each metamorphosis, the primitive immortal power and the great devil's power were evolving and transforming. Even now, they had become two supreme powers that were on par with the power of the Emperor and were not inferior to the power of the Yellow Springs. Lu Feng believed that once he underwent another metamorphosis and evolution, both the primitive immortal power and the great devil's power would enter a whole new realm. At that time, although the number of supreme powers he controlled would not change, his power of power would be much stronger. After this matter is over, I'll find a chance to train myself properly. After all, I am only at the peak evolution stage now. This level of strength is still too weak. It is time to enter the battle of the younger generation. After taking a deep breath, Lu Feng finally recovered completely. He looked at the 11 alchemy grandmasters and bowed respectfully. Previously, when his physical body had been completely suppressed, Lu Feng's soul still existed. At that moment, he could clearly see everything outside. Naturally, he could see the attitudes of these people clearly. Although there was a gap between him and Yuanling, Yu Huayan, and the other grandmasters, and this gap could never be mended. However, after seeing their anxious and excited attitudes, Lu Feng was still willing to show them some respect. Grandmaster Taratus, Grandmasters, I have finished refining. After saying this, Lu Feng gently handed over the pill in front of him. This was the first grade 5 pill Lu Feng had refined, and it was also the first grade 5 pill refined with forbidden power in this era. Its existence was no small matter, and as the refiner, Lu Feng was already very familiar with it. Therefore, Lu Feng didn't take a good look at it. He immediately let go of the pill. Taratus's face was filled with an exceptionally solemn expression as he received the elixir that Lu Feng had pushed over with both hands. A grade 5 pill wasn't much. In the eyes of an entity like him, even a grade 7 pill wouldn't make him so solemn and cautious. However, this grade 5 pill was different. It represented a miracle, the creation of an era, and a kind of fundamental transcendence. This was a milestone on the path of alchemy, a birth that transcended eras. Therefore, he should be solemn. After looking at it quietly for a while, Taratus was slightly surprised. After handing the pill to Grandmaster Yintiga, he glanced at Lu Feng. Then, Taradas's gaze fell on everyone in front of him. After a moment of silence, under the gazes of millions of people, Taradas slowly smiled. His voice rang out in a timely manner. The grade of the pill refined by the human tribe's Futu, grade 5. There was no need to say anything else. This was because although the Immortal King refined a grade 5 pill, the pill he refined was of inferior quality. Since Lu Feng had refined a grade 5 pill, then, regardless of the grade, it was impossible for him to lose to the Immortal King. In addition to the results of the previous 3 rounds, the winner of this alchemy competition was Lu Feng. Futu! 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 When the first person shouted Lu Feng's name, everyone in the venue went crazy. They all shouted Lu Feng's name at the same time and cheered heartily below. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng also smiled. It was a happy smile. He enjoyed this kind of cheering. This was the Medicine God Square, the holy land of the alchemists. The entire Medicine God city had fallen into an unprecedented frenzy at this moment. This was an ancient city, the holy land of the alchemists of the universe. But what happened here today was a miracle that belonged to the alchemists. Therefore, even those alchemy masters had fallen into a slight frenzy at this moment. The rest of the competition ended very quickly. Those geniuses and monsters also hastily refined a pill and were done with it. At this moment, they no longer had any desire to fight. Although the rewards for ranking at the top were still generous, they had already lost interest in anything after being defeated by Lu Feng and the Immortal King. Finally, half an hour later, everything was completed. Seeing that everything had been done, the Immortal King walked to Lu Feng's side. "You're really not bad. I didn't expect that I would fail." Although it was a pity, there was no pity in the Immortal King's eyes. All he had was a crazy fighting spirit. And Lu Feng did not retreat from this kind of fighting spirit. Although he knew that he was no match for the Immortal King, even in a battle of the same level, he was no match for him. But if the Immortal King really wanted to fight, Lu Feng was not afraid of anything. He was an emperor and was not afraid of any challenge. But obviously, the Immortal King was not the same person as Yu Hua Qingyuan. Although he was extremely eager for such a battle, the Immortal King would definitely not fight before Lu Feng could really fight against him. Hearing the Immortal King admit defeat, Lu Feng also revealed a smile. So far, he had never been defeated. Facing anyone, Lu Feng was the most powerful suppression. Although hundreds of millions of people listed Lu Feng as the #1 monster in the universe, Lu Feng did not care about this at all. And now, when the Immortal King admitted defeat, although this was just an alchemy competition that had nothing to do with any of them, Lu Feng still smiled. It was a smug and proud smile. After all, the one who admitted defeat was the Immortal King. He was the most terrifying existence Lu Feng had ever encountered in his life. Yes, you lost. This time, in this unrelated domain, you have lost. Then in the future confrontation, you will still be the same. Lu Feng's words were resolute and decisive. He was the Emperor Lu Feng. His path to becoming an emperor was the greatest path. No one could stop him or make him retreat. The heavenly kings could not and were suppressed by him. And this Immortal King was the same. Hearing Lu Feng's words, the Immortal King smiled slightly and shook his head gently. You are indeed world-shocking. However, you are still far from being able to make me fail. Lu Feng did not say anything. Because he was the same as the Immortal King, a true peak existence. There was no need for these useless words between them. The atmosphere was slightly silent. After a long time, the Immortal King glanced at Lu Feng and slowly sighed. I also didn't expect that you would have such talent on the path of alchemy. In that case, I will give you a gift. It can be considered as repaying the favor of lending you the divine object before. After saying this, The immortal king once again tore the void and took out 2 crystals from the space that belonged to him. Without the slightest hesitation, he directly sent the crystals to Lu Feng. Looking at the familiar appearance of the crystals, Lu Feng's eyes lit up slightly. He looked at the immortal king but did not say anything. The immortal king smiled slightly and said slowly, "You have comprehended the pill scripture, right? I already know this. After all, only those who have comprehended the pill scripture can use such a forbidden alchemy method." Lu Feng nodded gently. Indeed, there was nothing to deny. After all, Lu Feng already knew that the pill scripture was divided into many parts. What he had obtained was only one of them. Moreover, in this universe, there were also a few existences who had comprehended the pill scripture. Staring at Lu Feng, the smile on the immortal king's face turned slightly strange. Lu Feng stared at the immortal king in bewilderment. He didn't know why the immortal king would have such an expression. After a moment of silence, the immortal king slowly said, "Actually, I am also an existence who has comprehended the pill scripture." Chapter 4:16. Hearing this, Lu Feng was truly stunned. But very quickly, he finally revealed a look of understanding. Lu Feng knew that if the immortal king didn't comprehend the pill scripture, then no matter how heaven-defying his alchemy talent was, he wouldn't have such shocking strength. The fact that he comprehended the pill scripture was actually within his expectations. What I comprehended are the 2 pill scriptures. These are all mine, these are all mine. These things are of no use to me. Since you can defeat me on the path of alchemy, then these 2 pill scriptures will be your spoils of war and compensation for what I owe you before. Lu Feng looked at the 2 crystals in his hand and revealed a strange expression. Spoils of war and compensation, this is really a big deal. The value of the pill scripture was immeasurable. This was simply a priceless item. Even the Divine King's divine weapon of King Dao wouldn't be more valuable than any of the pill scriptures. But at this moment, the immortal king just casually threw this priceless treasure to him as a spoil of war and compensation. One has to know that the immortal king didn't just get some 4th-tier and 5th-tier divine objects from him. Although these things added up to more than a few 100 million divine object points, these few 100 million divine object points were really nothing in the eyes of these people. After all, when it comes to the pill scripture, even a 9th-tier divine object is inferior to it. After all, the pill scripture is a commodity. At this moment, Lu Feng couldn't help but sigh at the immortal king's generosity. Perhaps this is a shocking gift to you, but the pill scripture has no meaning to me. Seeing Lu Feng's slightly stunned expression, the immortal king smiled lightly. However, this smile was mixed with too many complicated emotions, too many indescribable emotions, and too much bitterness. You won't understand if I tell you these things. If one day, when we stand at the peak of the extreme Tao, or at that moment you, who knows everything, will understand. Lu Feng remained silent, not saying a word. At this moment, the immortal king once again looked at Lu Feng. After a long time, he let out a deep sigh. To be honest, I might have mastered 6 supreme powers, but compared to you, I'm still lacking. You should understand what I'm saying. However, it's a pity that you're too weak right now. Your cultivation is restricted, and you're unable to fully unleash the greatest strength that can crush everything. Your potential is unparalleled in this world. It's a pity that you're still too immature. Lu Feng nodded gently. He knew that the immortal king was right. No matter if it was the great demon power, the primitive immortal power, or the monarch power, no other power could compare to it. Although the heavenly Tao Crown Prince's power of the Yellow Springs was already considered to be at the pinnacle of the universe, the heavenly Tao Crown Prince's power of the Yellow Springs. But compared to Lu Feng's 3 great supreme powers, it was far, far inferior. Moreover, the power of his bloodline was equally shocking. The existence of the human monarch looked down on heaven and earth. The human monarch was the greatest existence of an era in the universe. Although his bloodline wasn't an epic bloodline, the degree of enhancement was several times more terrifying than any other epic bloodline. Lu Feng knew that if he could activate all the supreme powers to the limit, then the 6 supreme powers would be no match for him at all. Looking at Lu Feng's contemplative look, the immortal king hesitated for a moment, but in the end he still said, "Actually, I can feel 2 types of power in your body. Although those 2 types of power can't be compared to the power you possess, they are still supreme existences. In fact, they can be considered the peak of supreme power." Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. There were 2 supreme powers in his body? Why didn't he know this? I still have supreme powers? But I can't sense them. Besides, I haven't comprehended any supreme powers. Lu Feng started to think about his experience. However, halfway through his recollection, a dazzling light screen appeared in front of his eyes. At this moment, Lu Feng came to a sudden realization. He nodded lightly and said slowly, "I understand. The 2 supreme powers you mentioned. Are they the power of life and the power of death?" Lu Feng thought about it. He thought about the massacre abyss and the countless life and death experiences he had experienced in the final trial of endless trials. At that time, he seemed to have sensed an additional understanding of life and death in his body and soul. Later on, the power of life and death had indeed played a very powerful role. However, as time passed, the power of life and death seemed to have been used up and disappeared completely. As for them, Lu Feng didn't really care about them, so he had forgotten about them by now. Now that the immortal king mentioned it, Lu Feng finally understood that the power of life and death had never disappeared. It had all been hidden in the depths of his soul and in his body. The power of life and death is a supreme power that only almighty quasi-monarchs can possess. If one wants to step into the quasi-monarch realm, then one must comprehend the power of life and death. Although many quasi-monarchs have comprehended the power of life and death, the power of life and death is worthy of being called a supreme power. It is not weaker than the power of the yellow springs of the heavenly monarch. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. He had also heard of the power of life and death. Legend had it that the power of life and death could seize the power of reincarnation. The power of life and death corresponded to the most powerful laws of life and death. Lu Feng also knew that his second ancestor was the heavenly god of life and death. Back then, the heavenly god of life and death had comprehended the laws of life and death, and even evolved the power of life and death. At that time, in the current universe, he overlooked an era. If not for the mischief of fate, then the one who finally reached the supreme peak would not have been the divine king of chaos. The power of life and death. If you can comprehend it to a very deep level and be able to use it, then the powerful power will be enough to bring you one step closer to us. A strange light flashed in Lu Feng's eyes. He knew that this was right. If he could comprehend the power of life and death, then he would have 6 supreme powers. 6 supreme powers would be on par with the immortal king. Moreover, Lu Feng was confident that his 6 supreme powers would be stronger than the 6 supreme powers of the immortal king. At that time, he would truly have the capital and possibility to fight against the immortal king. Of course, if his primitive immortal power could evolve further, then even if he did not have the power of life and death, Lu Feng would still not be afraid of anything. Seeing Lu Feng's high fighting spirit, the immortal king smiled slightly. This was the kind of Lu Feng he wanted to see. Although he had lost this time, it did not matter to the immortal king, because he had already determined his position before the competition. This competition was only in an unrelated field. It would be best if he could win. Even if he failed, it was no big deal. Do your best. There is not much time left. I can feel the aura of their revival. Since they made the same choice as me, then they will definitely not be willing to sink forever. Their strength is also the pinnacle of an era. Therefore, if you are too slow, then even as the main character of this era, you will still be eliminated. After all, there are so many monstrous geniuses of this era who can change the fate of heaven and earth. Lu Feng's eyes moved slightly, but he did not say anything. As for the immortal king repeatedly saying that he, Lu Feng, was the main character of this era and was destined to be the king at the peak, Lu Feng had never understood. He did not believe in fate, because he knew that he himself was an existence beyond the control of fate. But vaguely, Lu Feng could not help but believe, because he felt that his existence seemed to be arranged by fate. Compared to the people the immortal king mentioned, Lu Feng was not worried at all. Lu Feng also understood that to be introduced by the immortal king so seriously, they must be invincible geniuses of the same level as the immortal king. But even so what? Facing such opponents, Lu Feng was only afraid of one thing, and that was that they were not strong enough. Since they have woken up, then that's good. I will be at the peak, waiting for them to challenge me. I am the immortal king, I am the supreme emperor. If they want to fight with me, then they want to challenge my existence. I will quietly watch from the supreme peak, waiting, anticipating, and bestowing them with challenges. The immortal king could also hear the arrogance in Lu Feng's words, but he did not say anything, because the immortal king knew that Lu Feng did indeed have the capital to be arrogant. The immortal king understood that once Lu Feng's supreme power entered the highest level, then even if he was facing his perfect state, Lu Feng would still be slightly stronger. It could be said that these monstrous geniuses had all chosen to give up everything and come here for the supreme peak. But they had always been incomplete, one battle after another, in order to completely make up for those incomplete parts. But Lu Feng was different. Compared to these people, Lu Feng was perfect. He was born without any flaws. What he needed to do was to continue to transform step by step until he entered the Emperor's realm, until he became the most eternal and supreme existence. With a deep sigh, the immortal king finally turned around and slowly walked out. At this moment, everyone realized that the immortal king was about to leave. Countless strange gazes surged, as if they were thinking of something. After taking 10 steps, the immortal king suddenly stopped in his tracks. Lu Feng could not see his expression, but Lu Feng could feel the strange emotions of the immortal king at this moment. He has also woken up. I can feel that he has completely recovered. Unlike my Wu Shang, he has fought too much, so it will take some time for him to return to his peak state. So during this period of time, you have to work hard. Otherwise, if you meet him, your ending will be very sad. After all, his title has already explained a lot. His title is Demon King. Immortal King, Demon King. Peerless Dual Kings. Lu Feng's heart was filled with endless shock. He naturally knew how terrifying an existence that could be introduced by the immortal king so solemnly was. Demon King, with the title of demon. And in the primitive immortal devil era, immortals and demons were existences that opposed each other since ancient times. To be able to be called a demon king, it meant that this demon king was definitely an invincible monster that was not weaker than the immortal king. After being stunned for a moment, Lu Feng smiled. He looked at the place where the immortal king had disappeared with that incomparably mysterious and inexplicable smile. Demon King, I'm looking forward to it. Chapter 4:17. The immortal king disappeared just like that. Just like his strange appearance and disappearance, it was also so incomprehensible that no one could feel any trace of him. Among the existences who were present to watch this grand competition, there were also many above the god realm. Among them, there were even terrifying existences at the true god realm. However, such powerful existences were actually unable to sense any trace of the immortal king's departure. This made many existences feel even more amazed by the mystery of the immortal king. A bunch of idiots. Even we can't sense any trace of his departure. It's just a group of true gods and ordinary gods who want to sense it. This is simply a joke. When Wangui saw those disappointed expressions, he revealed a trace of ridicule. When the immortal king left, the 11 grandmasters also released their senses. Unfortunately, they also couldn't grasp the trace of the immortal king's departure. In their senses, the immortal king strangely disappeared in front of them. This was unimaginable to them. What a mysterious immortal king. But that's right. If he was too ordinary, how could he be worthy of the title of immortal king? In the eyes of many existences, the immortal king was even more domineering than Lu Feng's title of emperor. At this moment, everyone's attention was focused on the only person. Everything he created could be called a miracle unparalleled in the world. Although Lu Feng's aptitude as a martial Dao Psyche master was not comparable to the immortal king's, in the path of alchemy, he could completely defeat the immortal king. Being able to refine a 5th-grade pill at the great Psyche master level, then who dares to say that Futu can't become a true alchemy master at the spiritual Psyche master level? Being able to refine a 5th-grade pill was already enough to be called a quasi-alchemy master. Everyone understood that as long as Lu Feng could make a breakthrough in the Psyche master level and become a spiritual Psyche master, then he would definitely be an alchemy master. This was obviously countless times more dazzling than the immortal king who had just become an alchemy master at the peak of the spiritual Psyche master level. The 11 alchemy masters walked to Lu Feng's side. Their expressions were complicated. Ordinary existences didn't know the significance of Lu Feng refining this pill. However, as the absolute existences of the current era's Tao of alchemy, they were completely clear about it and understood it thoroughly. This meant that it was extremely possible for Lu Feng to surpass a region sacred pill master. He had surpassed the strongest alchemy sacred master, who was said to be the closest to the god of alchemy. The path of alchemy is a true god. This was the only thought in the minds of many. They seemed to be able to foresee Lu Feng's future, the scene of him breaking through to the eternal legendary realm after the primordial immortal devil era and the era of pills and artifacts. Futu, good job, Wan returned to Lu Feng's side. Looking at Lu Feng, who had returned to his original appearance, he reached out his hand and gently patted him. There was a proud look on his face. Wangui brought Lu Feng here in order to let the world know that their human race had never withered away in the slightest on the path of alchemy. Lu Feng had indeed done it. Furthermore, what he had done was so satisfying and touching. Lu Feng could clearly see the excitement in Wangui's eyes. Lu Feng was filled with respect from the bottom of his heart for this Almighty who had dedicated everything to the human race and the Tao of alchemy. Therefore, when he heard Wangui say this, he didn't feel as confident as he had in the past. Lu Feng bowed slightly and saluted Wangui respectfully. President, the existence of you in the alchemy path of the human race is the most fortunate thing for the alchemy path of the human race. Wangui's face flushed red when he heard Lu Feng's words. He was a heavenly master, comparable to any monarch realm martialist. In the current era of the universe, he was considered an almighty. If he unleashed his full combat strength, he would be a terrifying powerhouse who could destroy a part of the galaxy. However, such a fearful almighty actually showed such excitement when he heard Lu Feng's words. This was enough to show how excited Wangui was at the moment. Wangui patted Lu Feng's shoulder once again but didn't say anything. At this moment, he was incomparably excited. Being acknowledged by Lu Feng was better than being acknowledged by trillions of people. Futu, this time you are the final victor. It can be said that in this generation, among the younger generation of alchemists, you are already standing at the peak of the grand alchemy competition. You are the winner of this most glorious competition, the only winner. Congratulations. Taradas walked over and said with a smile. Upon hearing this, Lu Feng responded in the most polite way possible. Behind him, the other three alchemist grandmasters, Grandmaster Gu Gui and Grandmaster Huang Mu, also came over to congratulate him. Su Ling was already standing beside Lu Feng. He didn't need to be on the same level as these people. Among these grandmasters, he had the best relationship with Lu Feng. In the end, the three alchemist grandmasters hesitated for a moment before walking over to congratulate Lu Feng. Lu Feng was also a little surprised that the three of them had come over to congratulate him. In his opinion, the three alchemist grandmasters should have left immediately after he succeeded. However, they still came. This made Lu Feng view the three of them in a new light. Thank you, alchemist grandmasters. Although Lu Feng was surprised by the attitude of the three alchemist grandmasters, his actions and etiquette were the same as the previous alchemist grandmasters. After seeing Lu Feng's attitude, the three foreign races alchemy masters sighed softly. To be honest, they would rather see Lu Feng's arrogance and be treated rudely by Lu Feng. After all, if that happened, it would prove that Lu Feng's temperament really wasn't good enough. Even if such an existence had a terrifying aptitude, the end result would still be the same. However, this humble and courteous Lu Feng made them feel uncomfortable and even afraid. After all, they knew that Lu Feng was terrifying to be able to display such a temperament after such an intense conflict. Wei Wei opened her mouth to say something. However, when she saw Lu Feng's clear gaze, both Yuanling and Yu Huayan sighed slightly. In the end, they turned around and didn't want to stay there any longer. Looking at their departing figures, the remaining alchemy grandmasters all revealed cold smiles. Although they had the same goal in some aspects, there was still a conflict between them that was basically difficult to reconcile. After losing their common goal, these people once again returned to their previous state. Alright, as this time's champion, Futu, you have a champion's reward. Hearing this, Lu Feng's eyes lit up slightly. The alchemy master competition that was held once every 100 years. Only the younger generation would be rewarded. After all, there was no need for any rewards in the pinnacle grand competition between alchemists. One had to know that they were all existences standing at the pinnacle. Whatever they wanted, it was basically within their reach. Therefore, the Alchemy Master Alliance's reward basically only appeared once every 100 years. Every time the Alchemy Master competition of the younger generation was held, almost all the alchemy geniuses in the universe would be gathered together. The reason for this wasn't just because of the title of the number one alchemist of the younger generation. After all, who would still remember this after a few hundred years? The biggest reason was the attractiveness of the Alchemy Master Guild's reward. It could be said that the reward for the champion of the younger generation was absolutely shocking. It would definitely make the gods go crazy, make the true gods excited, and make the sky gods look askance at it. And now, the reward was finally going to be Lu Feng's. The light in his eyes was unusually bright. Lu Feng had naturally heard about the reward for the Alchemy Master competition of the younger generation. At this moment, he was slightly silent, waiting for the reward to be distributed. Looking at Lu Feng's expression, Taradas smiled slightly and shook his head gently. Then, he said slowly, "Futu, this time your magnificent feat has never been seen before. Furthermore, you have also done us a great favor." Hearing this, Lu Feng smiled slightly. He naturally knew what this so-called great favor was. Indeed, if he and the Immortal King hadn't appeared out of nowhere, then the Alchemy Master Alliance wouldn't have been a match for Yuanling's disciple at all. Although Lu Feng had come this far for himself and for the human race, it was an indisputable fact that he had unintentionally helped the Alchemy Master Alliance. Seeing Lu Feng's smile, Taradas didn't hesitate and said directly, "Futu, in that case, you can name the reward this time." Lu Feng wasn't the only one who was stunned. Even Su Ling and Wangui were stunned when they heard Taradas's words. However, the three Grandmasters of the Alchemy Master Alliance were still the same as before. It seemed like they had already known about this decision beforehand. Lu Feng was a little confused. This reward wasn't too little. It was too big. As everyone knew, the Alchemy Master Alliance, which didn't have the burden of any race or power struggle, was known as the richest organization in the world. What Taradas meant was that Lu Feng could ask for anything. As long as he wanted it, it would be satisfied. This was simply shocking. Lu Feng was silent, and so were Su Ling and Wangui. They hadn't expected this to happen before. Undoubtedly, this was quite shocking. After a long time, Wangui seemed to think of something. A trace of hesitation appeared on his face, but in the end, he nodded firmly. When he saw the hesitant Lu Feng, Wangui walked over. "Fudu, come with me for a moment." Lu Feng was stunned when he heard this. However, he quickly realized something. Although Lu Feng didn't completely trust Wangui like he did his parents, he was still willing to listen to this elder of the human race. Lu Feng nodded gently and walked over to Wangui's side. At this time, before everyone's eyes, Wangui directly used his unparalleled power to open up a small space exclusive to him. Lu Feng knew that in this exclusive space, everything was independent. It was impossible for people from the outside world to hear what they were saying. Lu Feng already understood that what Wangui was about to say was confidential. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to make such a move in front of these alchemy grandmasters. "Do you have any ideas, President?" Without waiting for Wangui to speak, Lu Feng already asked first. Wangui nodded his head lightly. He hesitated for a bit before speaking. "Lu Feng, you are the young master of the Lu family. As the current emperor, the Federation and the Lu family can give you whatever resources you want." Lu Feng nodded gently. He knew that, based on what he had shown so far, as long as it was useful to him, the Federation and the Lu family would give him whatever he wanted. Even if they didn't have it, the entire human race would think of ways to get it for him. Therefore, he didn't need to think of ways to obtain these divine objects and resources like ordinary people. Chapter 4:18. Then you don't lack any divine objects at all. Although the Alchemist Alliance is known as the richest organization in the world, I think it's still inferior to the human race and the Lu family. Therefore, it's best if you don't ask for any divine objects. Lu Feng nodded again. Indeed, he didn't intend to ask for any divine objects. After hesitating for a moment, Lu Feng said, "Actually, President, I want to ask for the right to read the 3-Pill Sutras." Hearing Lu Feng's request, Wangui smiled and shook his head gently. "Lu Feng, you can rest assured about this. It might be difficult for others to get the right to read the 3-Pill Sutras. But for you, it's nothing. Not to mention the aptitude you have shown, just the Pill Sutra in your hands is enough for the Alchemist Alliance to agree." These people didn't notice the 2 Pill Sutras given to Lu Feng by the Immortal King before he left. Therefore, in Wangui's eyes, Lu Feng only had 1 Pill Sutras. "If you use this as a condition, then you'll really suffer a big loss." Lu Feng smiled gently. He also understood this. However, as Wangui said, he had the entire human race as his backing. He didn't lack any resources or divine objects at all. Besides the Pill Sutras, Lu Feng really didn't have anything else to ask from the Alchemist Alliance. "Lu Feng, what will happen after you get the right to read the 3-Pill Sutras? You have to know that even if you get the recognition of the Pill Sutras, you'll need a terrifying amount of time to completely comprehend the 3-Pill Sutras. Based on your aptitude, I'm afraid you won't be able to read them completely without 3 to 5 years. After all, if you want to comprehend the second one after comprehending the first one, the difficulty will increase a lot." Lu Feng nodded gently. There were some things that Wangui didn't know. If he could really obtain the recognition of the 3 Pill Sutra souls, then Lu Feng would be able to completely comprehend them in a very short period of time. After all, he had Xin Yuan's Sea of Consciousness. His comprehension speed there was several times faster than in the outside world. However, Lu Feng also knew that even with the help of the Divine Origin Sea, he would still need at least a year to comprehend the 3 alchemy scriptures. Moreover, he had more than one alchemy scripture in his possession. In addition to the one given to him by the Immortal King, Lu Feng had 5 copies of the Pill Sutra. According to Wangui, it would take Lu Feng at least 2 or more years to read and comprehend all 5 volumes of the Pill Sutra. Normally, this wouldn't be a big deal. However, this was not the case at this moment. Before the Immortal King left, he had told Lu Feng that an invincible monster had awakened. He was slowly recovering and would descend in a few days. To be able to make the Immortal King pay so much attention to him, he had to be an invincible monster. Lu Feng didn't have the confidence to confront him, so he needed more time to improve his cultivation. He couldn't afford to waste these 2 years. President, you should know that I really need time. Wangui nodded gently and said, Indeed, although I really want you to pour everything into the path of alchemy, I don't think so. However, I also understand that this is absolutely impossible. You are the legendary miracle of the alchemy world, Futu. However, you are also the Lu Feng of the human race and the Emperor Lu Feng. Although the human race needs alchemy masters, it needs an absolute combat power like you even more. Therefore, during this battle of the kings, what you should do the most is to make the best use of your time to improve your strength. Lu Feng nodded gently. Wangui had thought of even more things. After all, Wangui was speaking from the perspective of the human race. President, I plan to return to the Federation after obtaining the 3 copies of the alchemy scripture and enter the time realm to slowly cultivate. With the time realm, Lu Feng could save a lot of time. He was now at the level of a martialist, a peak evolution martialist. He still had one more chance to cultivate in the time realm. If he relied on the help of his teacher, Dao Songtian. In that case, Lu Feng still had 12 days, which meant that he had 1,200 days to comprehend it. In that case, it should be enough. However, when he heard this, Wangui smiled gently and shook his head slightly. This way of thinking is indeed the best. However, returning to the Federation to cultivate in the time realm is not so wise. Lu Feng was stunned but didn't say anything. He looked at Wangui quietly and waited for him to explain. Lu Feng, cultivating in the time realm also consumes one's lifespan. It is just a matter of time acceleration. The amount of lifespan consumed is exactly the same as the amount of time you spend cultivating. You should know this, right? Lu Feng nodded. In the time realm, one could indeed accelerate time. However, at the same time, one's lifespan would also be consumed. The lifespan of geniuses like you is extremely precious. Therefore, if you can, try not to cultivate in the time realm. After all, it is a completely independent world there. You simply cannot sense the existence of any universe laws. Therefore, your cultivation speed is much slower than in the universe. Lu Feng knew all this. However, although the time realm had so many restrictions, its usefulness really couldn't be ignored. When he saw Lu Feng's expression, Wangui knew what Lu Feng was thinking. Suddenly, he laughed heartily. When he heard this laughter, Lu Feng had a puzzled look on his face. Wangui didn't tease Lu Feng anymore. Instead, he explained directly. Actually, there is another realm in the universe called the Time Realm. It is different from the Time Realm. Cultivating in the Time Realm will not waste one's lifespan at all. The Time Realm is a true acceleration of time. At this moment, Lu Feng had an astonished expression on his face. He knew that if there was such a place, Dao Songtian wouldn't have kept it from him. However, Dao Songtian hadn't mentioned it yet. He hadn't even explained it in the slightest. This was enough to show how strange the time realm was. The time realm is different from the time realm. Cultivating in it has no lifespan restrictions at all. Furthermore, when cultivating in the realm of time, one's cultivation speed would be much faster. The speed of cultivation in the time realm can be accelerated to 200 times. 200 times. What a terrifying number! One day was equivalent to 200 days. Furthermore, one's lifespan wouldn't be consumed. Such a thing couldn't be described as heaven-defying. Then, President, if there really is such a thing, wouldn't there be monsters everywhere in this universe? If that was the case, then cultivating in the time realm for 1 year was equivalent to 200 years in the outside world. In that case, wouldn't there be experts who became gods before the age of 20 everywhere in the universe? Wangue smiled slightly and shook his head gently. If that's the case, then it's good. The time realm is extremely rare. In the current universe, there are only 2 places. Moreover, the time realm is so heaven-defying. Naturally, it is restricted by the universe. In the time realm, no laws or powers are allowed to exist. Even if you take pills in there, it won't have the slightest effect. Hearing this, Lu Feng finally calmed down slightly. If there really wasn't any restriction, then the time realm was a bit too terrifying. Therefore, the time realm is completely used for comprehension. Moreover, the biggest reason why people don't pay much attention to it at this time is because the price to use it is too great. Sure enough, even if it was just those restrictions, the existence of the time realm was already unimaginably terrifying. It was definitely an existence like a supreme, sacred ground. However, no one knew the real situation. Then, there could only be one reason. That was, the restrictions of the time realm were too great. Every time the time realm is used, at least 3 types of peak 8th grade divine objects are needed. Moreover, cultivating in the time realm for 1 day requires 1 type of peak 8th grade divine object. Lu Feng took a deep breath. What the time realm required was 8th grade divine objects, and even peak 8th grade divine objects. This was really too terrifying. One had to know that 8th grade divine objects were things used by almighty experts in the king realm. Divine objects of this level, even heavenly gods couldn't use them. Any 8th grade divine object was enough to move an almighty expert in the king realm. And a peak 8th grade divine object was definitely enough to make those experts in the virtual king realm above the 5th level fight for it. But now, in order to activate the time realm, 3 types of divine objects were needed. Moreover, every day, 1 type of peak 8th grade divine object was needed. This level of consumption was truly shocking to the point of being unimaginable. Lu Feng believed that even a peak overlord race wouldn't be able to bear such a terrifying consumption. Soon, Lu Feng seemed to have thought of something. A trace of excitement appeared in his eyes. Lu Feng looked at Wangue, and Wangue nodded gently. In the current universe, there are only 2 time realms. One belongs to the first royal family of the Emperor race, Di Shi Tian's bloodline. The other place is in our alchemist alliance. I said that your condition is to enter the time realm to cultivate for a few days, so that you can try to comprehend the pill scripture. Lu Feng fell silent. After a long time, he looked at Wangue and asked, "Then, will the Alchemist Alliance agree?" A peak 8th grade divine object was definitely not something that an ordinary 8th grade divine object could compare to. This was something that even a 5th level virtual king realm expert would disregard his reputation to fight for. It could be said that this kind of item was absolutely precious in any race. If Lu Feng wanted to enter the time realm to cultivate, he would need to consume at least 4 peak 8th grade divine objects. This kind of price was really too terrifying. In Lu Feng's opinion, even the Alchemist Alliance wouldn't agree. After all, Lu Feng was only the champion of the younger generation's grand alchemy competition. Lu Feng, I know your concerns. In fact, I'm also worried that they won't agree. After all, you have a race, and anyone with a discerning eye can see that. You are the Futu of the human race. Therefore, I'm not sure if they will agree. Silence, endless silence. Both of them didn't speak. They also knew that this request was a little too difficult. Actually, it's not impossible to give it a try. After all, you are someone who has been summoned by Alchemy Saint Rome. Moreover, the aptitude that you have displayed has already surpassed the boundaries of your race. I think that in order to be able to see the final glorious appearance, the Alchemist Alliance might agree. Moreover, will you be satisfied if you don't give it a try? Hearing this, Lu Feng finally let out a deep breath and revealed a trace of a smile. President, you are right. If I don't give it a try, how can I be satisfied? After shattering the independent space, the two of them slowly walked out. When they saw the two of them, everyone knew that they had already decided on what they wanted. Chapter 419. Taratus walked over to Lu Feng with a smile. Futu, have you decided what you want? Lu Feng nodded gently and said directly, Your Highness Grand Master Taratus, I've already thought about it. However, before I ask for the reward, I would like to exchange something with you. Exchange? Taratus was stunned for a moment before he nodded gently. However, there was a faint smile on his face. In his opinion, Lu Feng wouldn't have anything good. After all, as the first elder of the Alchemist Union, he had seen everything. However, when he thought about Lu Feng's potential and future achievements, Taratus made up his mind. No matter what the exchange was, he would agree to it. Upon seeing Taratus' expression, Lu Feng could also guess what this elder was thinking. In fact, this situation was also within Lu Feng's expectations. After all, as the first elder of the Alchemist Union, Taratus had seen too many things. On the surface, Luo Yunyang's identity was just a freakish alchemist from the human race. Although his potential was shocking, he was still too young, and the things he had accumulated were definitely limited. After pondering for a moment, Lu Feng took out 3 crystals from his personal space. When he saw the crystals, Wangue was slightly stunned. However, he quickly revealed a look of contemplation and doubt. When they saw the crystals in Lu Feng's hands, the other grandmasters were also puzzled. They naturally knew that the crystals that Lu Feng had taken out were inheritance crystals. The greatest use of such things was to pass down cultivation technique. However, as alchemists, they weren't very interested in the cultivation techniques of psychic masters and martialists. Taratus looked at the 3 crystals in Lu Feng's hands. At first, he didn't pay much attention to them. However, after observing them for a while, a solemn expression finally appeared on his face. When Lu Feng brought them in front of him, Taratus was even more excited. Grandmaster Yintigo was the same. The two of them had already recognized them. They looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. Taking a deep breath, Taratus looked at Lu Feng and said solemnly, Futu, are you planning to exchange for the other 3? Lu Feng smiled and nodded. He slowly said, Grandmaster Taratus, as you expected, I want to use the 3 crystals in my hands to exchange for the other 3 divisions of the Alchemist Alliance. Pill Sutra. Silence. There was another period of endless silence in the void. Except for the 3 non-humankind masters who had walked away and the 2 human masters, the other 6 masters all looked at Lu Feng with an extremely difficult look. These people had already guessed that Lu Feng possessed the Pill Sutra. However, according to their thinking, the pill mantra in Lu Feng's hands should be a copy obtained through other channels, and the original source still belonged to the Alchemist Guild. However, after hearing Lu Feng's words, they understood. They knew that Lu Feng's Pill Sutra was definitely different from the Alchemist Guild's Pill Sutra. Otherwise, he wouldn't have proposed an exchange. Looking at the 3 crystals floating in Lu Feng's hands, even an idiot would have guessed it. Taradas smiled faintly. His voice was filled with an extremely strange feeling. His voice slowly drifted over. As expected of a monstrous alchemist. Existences like you are all favored by the heavens and earth. Your providence is incomparably terrifying. It seems like this is indeed the case, a long sigh. The Alchemist Guild was a colossus, but after half an era of collecting, they finally managed to gather the 3-Pill Sutra. However, Lu Feng alone, a young person, controlled the equivalent of the Alchemist Guild's entire Pill Sutra. This made them speechless. I agree to your terms of exchange. After a moment of silence, Taradas's voice slowly rang out. Even without the 3-Pill Sutra, as long as Lu Feng wanted to see the 3-Pill Sutra in the Alchemist Guild's Pill Sutra, there wouldn't be any problem. After all, the Pill Sutra was the commonwealth of all the alchemists in the universe. As long as one wanted to, they could read it after passing the review. Moreover, Lu Feng took out the same 3 copies of the Pill Mantra. One had to know that the Pill Sutra was the most precious thing in the Alchemist Guild. Lu Feng smiled. Lu Feng wasn't surprised at all that Taradas had agreed. Looking at Lu Feng's smile, Taradas also revealed a happy smile. Since he had unexpectedly obtained 3 copies of the Pill Mantra, then the Pill Master Guild now had a total of 6 copies of the Pill Mantra. Although they didn't know the exact number of Pill Sutra, according to the speculation of those ancient sage Tao alchemists, the number of Pill Sutra might not be small, but it wouldn't be very large either. It was estimated that there wouldn't be more than 10 Pill Sutras. Even if there were 10 Pill Sutras, they controlled 6 Pill Sutras, which was more than half. Now that they had obtained 3 more copies of the Pill Scripture, they were one step closer to completely collecting the greatest scripture of the Pill Tao. Futu, state your conditions. Taradas was in a very good mood now. In his opinion, Lu Feng was becoming more and more pleasing to the eye. Therefore, Taradas had already decided that no matter what Lu Feng's request was, he would try his best to satisfy it. Lu Feng looked at Taradas and remained silent for a moment. Soon, a look of determination appeared in his eyes. Lu Feng raised his head and looked at Taradas. He said slowly and solemnly, Grandmaster Taradas, my reward is not something I want. I just hope to get an opportunity. An opportunity to cultivate for 3 days. Taradas looked at Lu Feng in confusion. He didn't understand what a chance to cultivate for 3 days had to do with this reward. However, a moment later, he seemed to have thought of something and his expression changed. Apart from him, the other grandmasters behind him also had the same expression. They were all silent as they looked at Taradas quietly. The corners of their mouths twitched slightly. However, Taradas still asked, You are talking about the realm of time. After saying this, Taradas looked at Wangui. He knew that the Alchemist Alliance had news about the realm of time. Apart from the Grandmasters in the Alchemist Alliance, only the Grandmasters outside knew about it. Wangui saw Taradas's expression and smiled faintly. Seeing this scene, Taradas understood that Wangui had told Lu Feng about it. At this moment, Dilatus had fallen into a difficult situation. If what Lu Feng asked for was a divine item, even a peak grade 8 divine item wouldn't be a big deal. After all, although that item was precious, the Alchemist Alliance still had it. Moreover, Lu Feng had just given them 3 copies of the Alchemist Scripture. This was equivalent to the entire Alchemist Alliance. Therefore, if they only gave a peak grade 8 divine item, although they were a little reluctant, they would still give it to him. However, it was different now. Because Lu Feng wanted to enter the realm of time to cultivate for 3 days. Every time the realm of time opened, 3 peak grade 8 divine items were required. These 3 days were equivalent to 3 peak grade 8 divine items. In this way, Lu Feng's request was equivalent to asking for 6 peak grade 8 divine items. Peak grade 8 divine items. This is something that even the virtual king, who is above the 5th level, would be moved. He would want to fight for it like crazy. Hearing Taradas's words, Lu Feng only responded in silence. He naturally knew the value of a peak grade 8 divine item. However, it was a pity that other than entering the realm of time, he really didn't need anything else. Futu, can't you change your request to something else? Taradas said with a hint of bashfulness. Previously, he had asked Lu Feng to ask for anything. However, now that Lu Feng said it, he became evasive and evasive. He wanted Lu Feng to change his mind. Such a matter undoubtedly made one of the most honorable people in the path of alchemy feel very ashamed. Although it was a little pitiful that such an alchemy grandmaster like Taradas was in such a state, Lu Feng knew that other than this, he really didn't need anything else. After hesitating for a moment, Lu Feng finally shook his head. After seeing Lu Feng's appearance, Taradas fell silent. At this moment, the grandmasters around them were also behaving the same way. They were all silent and looked at Taradas quietly. Time passed by minute by minute. Taradas, who was standing above the void, was unusually speechless. He truly liked a monstrous genius like Lu Feng. In addition, Lu Feng had just given the Alchemist Alliance 3 copies of the Pill Scripture. It could be said that Lu Feng's request wasn't too much. However, a peak grade 8 divine item was too precious. Even for those peak overlords, not every ancient virtual king above grade 5 had something refined from a peak grade 8 divine item. Of course, if it was only one, Taradas would be ruthless and give it to him. However, Lu Feng's request required 6. This number really made him feel a great deal of pressure. Just as Taradas was hesitating and his expression kept changing, his expression suddenly changed. His expression suddenly froze, and in the next moment, a trace of relief and excitement appeared in his eyes. Finally, after his expression changed, Taradas didn't hesitate and walked directly to Lu Feng's side. At this moment, Lu Feng only looked at Taradas nervously. Lu Feng knew that he would soon find out if he could enter the realm of time to cultivate. Taradas looked at Lu Feng and said directly, "Futu, I agree to your request." Hearing this, not only was Lu Feng stunned, but also Wangue and the others. Although they hoped that Lu Feng could enter the realm of time to cultivate, they also knew that such a request was too difficult to achieve. Therefore, when Taradas agreed, they were all stunned. Looking at Lu Feng's expression, Taradas smiled slightly and seemed to be teasing him. Just now, if it wasn't for Alchemy Saint Rong, who was the true overlord of the Alchemist Alliance, who had sent him a message, even if Taradas was the current number 1 elder of the Alchemist Alliance, he wouldn't have dared to agree. After all, 6 peak grade 8 divine items were too shocking. However, it was different now. Since Alchemy Saint Rong, the true overlord of the Alchemist Alliance, had spoken, then everything was no longer a problem. Looking at Lu Feng's expression of disbelief, Taradas laughed and asked, "Futu, when do you plan to enter?" You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.